Chapter 707. After Yin Jiao released the 5 Chong-Lu tribesmen according to their agreement, they thought they would leave immediately. Unexpectedly, Wu He and the rest chose to stay in Yin Jiao's territory. However, they didn't go near Yin Jiao's headquarters. For the time being, they didn't want to go near the place where they were locked up. They stayed at the Flaming River trading point and chatted with the Taihe tribesmen. After all, they were all from the other side of the sea. As for the Chong-Lu tribesmen, Yin Jiao had been keeping a close eye on them. If they tried to rob them again, they would kill them without mercy. The Taihe tribesmen went into the forest to choose the location of their tribe and build houses. The Yin Jiao tribesmen also helped, but Xiao Xian didn't have to keep an eye on them. Building houses wasn't difficult for the Yin Jiao tribesmen, and the Yin Jiao tribesmen couldn't help the Taihe tribesmen reclaim the land to plant herbs. After bringing the Taihe tribesmen back, Xiao Xian went to the underground secret room of the Flaming River Castle. In the secret room, there was an ice cube that looked like a pterosaur. It was the one Xiao Xian fished up from the sea. Other than that, there were other things. There were 2 gomphos the size of rabbits. One had just died, and the other was half-rotten. The strange man that the Hui tribe brought over was placed in a corner of the secret room. Xiao Xian didn't need to study him anymore. After this experiment, he would burn the strange man. After the Hui tribe gave him away, they didn't want him back. Instead of letting him rot here, they might as well burn him. That way, they could prevent any hidden dangers. If the Hui tribesmen were here right now, they would definitely notice the changes in this strange man. When he was in the Hui tribe, even though this strange man looked like he was dead, he could still feel something special in his body. But now this strange man was truly dead. All the special aura was gone. Before Xiao Xian left the tribe to go out to sea, he had just discovered some of the secrets of this strange man. He just didn't have time to prove his conjecture. During the voyage, there were too many restrictions on the ship, so Xiao Xian didn't dare to take any risks. If he wasn't careful, he would drag the whole team down with him. That was why he didn't have to worry about making a hole in the ship until now. When Xiao Xian was studying the strange man, he discovered that there were secrets hidden in the strange man's bones. For a dead person without any internal organs, it was almost impossible for them to move. However, this strange man could still walk, run, chase, and kill people. What drove him to move was the power in their bones. Bone marrow could produce blood. Even if the bone marrow could no longer produce blood, it could still be turned into bone marrow with the ability to produce blood when needed. After an animal's body died, the bone marrow in its bones still had a certain amount of potential. Xiao Xian called this activity. As long as the bone marrow was still active, then it could be given power again. Even if the body had lost its original consciousness, it could be said that even if it could move again, it was no longer the same person or beast as before. What drove it to move was the power in its bones. It was like a puppet with no self-consciousness. Logically speaking, the longer the time of death, the less active the bones would be and the lower the success rate. That was why if they wanted to successfully create a monster, they had to deal with it as soon as possible. Of the 2 gomphos, the newly dead one had much more active bones than the half-rotten one. As for the half-rotten gomphos, even if Xiao Xian could make it stand up again, it would only be like a rusty machine. It wouldn't be able to move normally. These were all Xiao Xian's speculations. They were all based on theory, and he hadn't had time to verify them yet. Xiao Xian hadn't expected to encounter the frozen ancient creatures during the voyage. Why did Xiao Xian only choose the pterosaur and not the others? It was because the other frozen ancient creatures had very little activity in their bones. Instead of looking for them, it was better to just randomly pick an animal that had died a long time ago. For example, the half-rotten gomphos next to him had the same level of activity in their bones. However, the pterosaur was different. The activity in its bones made Xiao Xian confident that his experiment would succeed. However, when they arrived at the shore and the ice melted, Xiao Xian discovered that there was something strange about the pterosaur's body. That bit of life force increased the activity in its bones. The reason why this fellow that was suspected to be a pterosaur was different from the other ancient creatures that were sealed in ice was perhaps because it was alive before it was sealed in ice, while the other ancient creatures that were sealed in ice had already been killed before they were frozen. Xiao Xian didn't test the newly dead Gomphos. He looked at the block of ice on the stone table and brought the torch closer to it. He melted the water off the ice. As the ice melted, the pterosaur appeared in front of Xiao Xian again. It was still curled up in a ball with its wings wrapped around its body. Its head was also tucked in, so Xiao Xian couldn't see what it looked like. Xiao Xian gently pulled at the wrapped wings, but it didn't budge. He didn't force it either. If Xiao Xian wanted to use the activity in its bones to make it stand up again, the first thing he needed to do was to give it power. Power from the fire seed. The fire seed's power could be fused into the blood of the tribesmen, and it could be passed down from generation to generation. Of course, it could also be stored in the bone marrow. Even if the blood didn't work, the bone marrow could still carry the fire seed's power. After wiping the water off the stone table, Xiao Xian looked at the unmoving creature. Its life force wasn't stable. It grew stronger and weaker at times, as if it was in a battle. If it won, its life force would grow stronger and stronger. This ancient creature that had been frozen for God knows how many years might come back to life on its own. If they lost, they would completely fall silent, rotting away like the other frozen ancient creatures. Xiao Xian didn't make a move immediately. He wanted to see what would happen to this ancient creature first. Its life force alternated between strong and weak. It went from slow to fast, then slowed down again. Bit by bit, it began to weaken. It had lost. Maybe it was because it had been frozen for too long that it wasn't strong enough to win this battle of life and death. When its life force gradually weakened and almost disappeared, Xiao Xian raised his hand. Only when the host didn't resist would the success rate be higher. Now that its life force was almost gone, it naturally couldn't resist. This was why Xiao Xian didn't make a move just now. Xiao Xian called out the fire seed's power. This was actually very similar to when he engraved Caesar. At that time, he used the totem's power. Although the totem's power also came from the fire seed, it was still different from the fire seed. Now, Xiao Xian was using the Yin-Jiao fire seed's power that had fused with his body. However, Xiao Xian didn't completely separate the other power in his body. He allowed it to be used together with the Yin-Jiao fire seed's power. Sometimes, the other special power in the body was even more useful than the Yin-Jiao fire seed. If the Yin-Jiao fire seed's power couldn't make this experiment work, perhaps adding another power would increase the success rate. The totem appeared, and flames appeared on Xiao Xian's outstretched hand. His hand was placed directly above the creature that looked like a pterosaur. The flames slowly spread down until the creature was completely engulfed in flames. It was as if the creature was burning. The flames passed through the skin, muscles, and seeped into every bone. The high vitality of the bones allowed them to quickly absorb the power of the flames. Xiao Xian used his special vision to observe the creature and found that the creature's bones were changing. The original bones seemed to be dyed red. This was due to the infiltration of power. At first, only the bones with bone marrow were changing, but soon, Xiao Xian found that it wasn't just that. Like the melting of frozen blood, Xiao Xian felt that the creature's blood was beginning to flow. Xiao Xian saw that some thin red lines were beginning to appear. Those were blood vessels. The red color was the power of the fire seed that had fused with the blood. To a certain extent, this was another way of fusing fire seeds. However, the target was different, and the purpose was different. Thump, thump. The sound of a heartbeat suddenly sounded. Hearing this sound, Xiao Xian was stunned. Logically speaking, this shouldn't have happened. After all, the creature was already dead, just like those monsters. They had lost their hearts and other organs, but they could still stand up. It was obvious that those monsters didn't need a heart. But now, the heart of the creature under his palm was starting to beat. Thump, thump. Thump, thump. At first, it was very weak, but it gradually became stronger. As more and more thin red lines appeared, especially those gathered around the heart, they were especially active. The heartbeat also became faster. At first, it could only be heard twice, but it was rhythmic like breathing. The life force became stronger, like an eruption that suddenly broke through ice. All of this proved that this creature was waking up. Xiao Xian didn't stop. It also didn't reject Xiao Xian's method. It didn't reject the power of the fire seed. Perhaps it also knew that this was the only way for it to wake up. Its frozen body began to warm up. The wings that had been wrapped around it moved slightly, emitting a slight cracking sound. The exposed hind claws slowly extended outwards. Xiao Xian found that its hind legs were thicker than those of a bat and looked more powerful. Ka. The wrapped wings loosened again, opening bit by bit to both sides. The head that was curled inside also extended outwards. Xiao Xian looked at the ancient creature that was unwrapped. Without a doubt, this was a pterosaur. However, compared to many pterosaurs that Xiao Xian knew, this one was much smaller. Chapter 708. Xiao Xian didn't know if the pterosaur was so small because it was still in its infancy, or if it was the size of an adult. He didn't know the answer yet. As its body warmed up, its blood flowed, and its heart beat strongly. The pterosaur, which was placed on the stone table, finally opened its eyes after spreading its wings. As a reptilian beast, its eyes looked sharp and murderous, but they weren't as cold as those of a snake or crocodile. As soon as it opened its eyes, it seemed to be in a daze, unable to adapt to its current situation. After being frozen for so long, its brain couldn't work properly. After a while, Xiao Xian saw the pterosaur on the table turn its head and look at him. It seemed to be frightened and wanted to retreat, but after struggling for a while, it fell down again. Although its body began to move slowly after thawing, it was still far from being able to move freely. Since it couldn't move, it could only open its mouth and roar threateningly. Xiao Xian noticed that there were some sharp teeth in its mouth. Some pterosaurs had teeth, while others didn't. The one in front of him now belonged to the former, and it looked a little fierce. Xiao Xian observed the changes in its body. The pterosaur's body temperature was rising, but it was different from other reptiles. It was more like a bird, and its body temperature stopped rising after a certain range. Its organs began to move, and it knew how to be vigilant and threaten people. Its brain also began to have self-awareness. At this time, it truly came back to life from its frozen state. Contrary to Xiao Xian's expectations, Xiao Xian originally wanted to use it to test out how to control bones. He didn't expect things to turn out like this. However, it wasn't too bad. After all, this was a creature that lived a long time ago. Xiao Xian was very curious about it, and he was also very interested in the era it originally lived in. Since there was such an existence, did it mean that there were more ancient beasts that existed in some unknown place in this world? Other than some small ventilation holes, there were no gaps large enough for it to escape. Therefore, Xiao Xian was not worried that it would escape. Besides, it had just recovered, and its body skills had not yet returned to normal. It would be difficult for it to get up, so there was no need to worry. Leaving it to struggle, Xiao Xian walked to the other side of the table and looked at the recently slaughtered gomphos. Compared to the half-rotten one, Xiao Xian decided to try this one first. Just as he was about to attack, Xiao Xian suddenly felt a strong gaze on him. He turned his head and saw the pterosaur, who had been trying to flip itself over, staring at him. To be more precise, the pterosaur was staring at his gomphos. Hungry. After being frozen for so long, it wasn't strange for it to be hungry. If it wanted to recover quickly, eating was indeed a way to recover. It was also one of the instincts of wild beasts. Xiao Xian used his knife to cut off a piece of meat from the gomphos and handed it to the pterosaur, who was struggling to flip itself over on the table. When Xiao Xian approached, the pterosaur cautiously took a step back. It almost lost its balance and fell down again. Its forelimbs were highly degraded. Its fourth finger had become a winged finger, and its wings were no longer flexible. However, hunger still forced it to accept the food in front of it. The pterosaur quickly bit down on the piece of meat in Xiao Xian's hand. It opened its mouth twice and swallowed it. The next moment, it raised its head and bit down on Xiao Xian's hand. It didn't look like it was joking. Its teeth looked like it was going to bite Xiao Xian's finger and leave a few bloody holes. However, just as it was about to bite Xiao Xian's finger, it stopped abruptly. It didn't want to stop, but it had no choice. At this moment, it had no control over its body. Get down. As soon as Xiao Xian's voice fell, the pterosaur, which had already stood up, involuntarily fell back onto the table. It spread its wings and extended its two hind limbs. Its entire body was pressed against the stone table. Gah! A sharp sound rang out in the secret underground room. This was the pterosaur's terrified cry as it was forced to lie down. No one would be able to remain calm when they couldn't control their own body, let alone an ancient beast that was extremely cautious of its surroundings. Xiao Xian glanced at the pterosaur, who was lying on the stone table, and then looked away. It could be said that this was a special method of enslavement. The only difference was that compared to normal enslavement, this method was more suitable for humans or animals who had lost their own consciousness. This was because this method was equivalent to taking over the body. The pterosaur had full control over the body, and not the body's owner. Therefore, enslavement would be much smoother when the body had lost its consciousness. The success rate would also be higher. Furthermore, after enslavement, the pterosaur would be able to completely control the slave and would not have to worry about betrayal. Normal enslavement wouldn't allow the pterosaur to completely control the slave. For example, Xiao Xian could sense Sapphire's position and the general condition of its body. He could also influence the power in Sapphire's body. After all, that power was given by Xiao Xian during the enslavement. However, this pterosaur was different. Although the pterosaur was able to stand up again because of Xiao Xian's power, the power had been directly integrated into every bone in its body. Xiao Xian could control every bone in the pterosaur's body. This was also why Xiao Xian didn't tie it up and allowed it to move freely on the table. No matter what the pterosaur wanted to do, Xiao Xian could stop at any time. He could even break its bones without touching it. However, compared to normal enslavement, this special enslavement method required more and purer power. The pterosaur that was forced to lie on the stone table screamed for a while before its attention was drawn to the gomphos that had just been killed. It looked at the gomphos that still reeked of blood, then looked at Xiao Xian cautiously. Then it looked back at the gomphos. Xiao Xian ignored it. He continued to use the same method on the dead gomphos that had lost its consciousness. Xiao Xian didn't remove its organs. He was just trying it out. He didn't plan on using it for a long time, so he didn't do anything else. Since the gomphos hadn't been dead for too long, its bones were still quite active. It also didn't have any consciousness, so Xiao Xian's enslavement went smoothly. The pterosaur had been staring at the gomphos, thinking about how to eat it. However, when flames suddenly appeared in Xiao Xian's hands, the pterosaur let out a sharp cry. Its voice was filled with infinite panic and fear. It was far more terrified than when it was being controlled. Xiao Xian frowned, but he didn't stop what he was doing. He ignored the pterosaur's screams. The gomphos that had already lost its life force was rapidly changing. This change wasn't on the outside, but on the inside. Whoosh! The dead gompho's stiff body suddenly became flexible. It flipped over and stood up. When it moved, Xiao Xian could even hear the sound of its stiff muscles being forcefully moved. Chapter 709. During this special enslavement process, Xiao Xian compared the gomphos to the pterosaur. Compared to the pterosaur, enslaving the gomphos required a lot less energy and was much simpler. Part of the reason was that the gomphos didn't have self-awareness, but the most important part was its nature. Even though the gomphos' bones were more active, they weren't of high quality. Simply put, their bones couldn't contain much fire seed energy. This was just a normal wild beast in the forest. It was at the bottom of the food chain, so its bones couldn't contain too much energy. The pterosaur wasn't big either. In fact, it was even smaller than the gomphos. However, while enslaving it, Xiao Xian noticed that the pterosaur's bones could fuse with more fire seed energy than the gomphos. The amount of fire seed energy a bone marrow could fuse with had nothing to do with its size. Then, could it be that the higher the rank of the species, the stronger the person, the more energy they could contain? Xiao Xian decided to go to the vicious beast meat stall and catch a freshly slaughtered vicious beast. Just as he was about to leave, Xiao Xian remembered the pterosaur that was still lying on the stone table. He turned around and saw the pterosaur twisting its neck to look at Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian turned around and opened the door to the secret room. He walked out and closed the heavy stone door behind him. The moment he closed the door, Xiao Xian released his control over the pterosaur. However, he didn't go far. Instead, he stood outside the secret room for a while. Xiao Xian could feel the pterosaur's every movement. It was as if everything was projected into his mind. However, it wasn't an image of the pterosaur's entire body. It was just a skeleton that had fused with the fire seed energy. He could even see the creature's swaying tail clearly. After Xiao Xian left, the pterosaur thought that it had regained its freedom. After it got up, it looked around cautiously and let out a cry. When it didn't see anything out of the ordinary, it cautiously waited for a while. Then, it crawled towards the gomphos on the other side of the table. Its wings were a little more flexible than when it had just thawed, and it could climb up faster. The smell of the gomphos' blood made it crawl even faster. Almost as soon as it reached the gomphos, it stretched its neck and opened its mouth to bite the gomphos. In the beginning, the meat that Xiao Xian had given it was not enough to satisfy its hunger. It wasn't strong enough yet, so it could only use its fangs to scrape the flesh off the gomphos' body bit by bit. It didn't scrape a lot of flesh off each time, but it ate very quickly. Xiao Xian watched at the door of the secret chamber for a while before leaving. There was nothing important inside. No matter how hard the pterosaur tried, it would be useless. It couldn't pierce through the thick stone walls of the secret chamber, right? At the same time, Xiao Xian also wanted to know how far he could effectively control the pterosaur. The more he learned, the more Xiao Xian felt that there was a lot of information hidden in this book that would allow him to better understand the person who invented this special enslavement method. Up until now, no one knew who or what group had enslaved these strange people. EC said that the E family was involved in this, but no one knew how much they were involved. What role did the person who had left the E family 1,000 years ago play in all of this? Xiao Xian shook his head and continued to walk outside. He tried to feel the image in his mind. As long as it was within his effective control range, the image of the pterosaur should still be there. Even after Xiao Xian walked out of the flaming river castle, the image in his mind was still clear. The pterosaur was still eating. He went to the stall that sold vicious beast meat and picked up a freshly slaughtered vicious beast to carry back. The pterosaur, who had been biting into its food, heard the noise and immediately shrunk behind the gomphos. Xiao Xian ignored it and placed the vicious beast he carried back on the stone table. This vicious beast had already been slaughtered. Its organs had been removed and the blood had been drained. It had also been roughly wiped clean, so only a small amount of blood had dripped onto the table. The pterosaur, who was hiding behind the gomphos, poked its head out to look at Xiao Xian when it smelled the blood. It seemed to be trying to determine if Xiao Xian would beat it to the ground again. Then it looked at the vicious beast. It wanted to go forward but didn't dare to. Obviously, it was interested in the ferocious beast. The meat of a ferocious beast was different from that of an ordinary wild beast. Different animals were attracted to different kinds of meat. This pterosaur was obviously more attracted to vicious beasts. It was just afraid of Xiao Xian, so it didn't dare to go forward. Xiao Xian used the same method to enslave this vicious beast. Just as Xiao Xian had guessed, vicious beast bones could absorb more fire seed energy than normal beasts. However, it still couldn't be compared to humans. When Xiao Xian was studying the strange man, although he didn't complete the experiment, he could still make a rough guess. Combined with the few experiments he had done so far, Xiao Xian guessed that compared to vicious beasts, humans had a much stronger affinity with fire seeds. This was probably why the people of Rock Hill City chose humans over desert beasts. After the experiment, Xiao Xian prepared to carry the vicious beast out. He only wanted to test the enslavement method and the fire seed energy on this vicious beast. After the experiment, he could still eat it. Of course, he wouldn't sell it at the stall anymore. He would feed it to the Yinjiao people in the flaming river castle. These were the bones of a vicious beast with a fire seed, so it was different from others. Before he carried it out, Xiao Xian saw that the pterosaur was still staring at him. So he cut off a piece of meat and placed it on the stone table. Then, he carried the vicious beast and left. After leaving the secret room, Xiao Xian handed the vicious beast to the people in the flaming river castle who were preparing for lunch. Cut off the bones and boil them into soup. Don't waste the marrow inside. These are bones with a fire seed, Xiao Xian said. The Yinjiao warrior who took the vicious beast was confused. He looked at the vicious beast in his hand and felt that something was wrong. Since he couldn't figure it out, the warrior didn't think too much about it. He just followed the Grand Elder's instructions. After taking a few steps, he slapped his head. The Grand Elder's words could be summed up in one word. Wasn't it just eating? He understood. When he returned to the secret room, almost a third of the vicious beast meat that Xiao Xian left there before he left had been eaten. The meat that Xiao Xian left behind was about the same size as the pterosaur's body. Judging from the pterosaur's posture, it didn't seem like it had any intention of stopping. Xiao Xian didn't know how much it would eat in the end. Perhaps it realized that Xiao Xian didn't attack it twice, so the pterosaur became bolder. It was mainly because it was in front of food, so it became bolder than usual. However, it still didn't dare to approach Xiao Xian. It looked at Xiao Xian with eyes full of fear. Xiao Xian only glanced at the pterosaur and didn't look at it anymore. He planned to test out the half-rotten gomphos. After all, he had already brought it here. It would be a waste if he didn't use it. When Xiao Xian was trying to enslave it, he also spared some time to observe the pterosaur's reaction. When he was enslaving the vicious beast, the pterosaur showed a terrified expression. Although it didn't scream, it hid behind the gomphos. In Xiao Xian's mind, he could even see the pterosaur's trembling face. Now, when Xiao Xian's hand was on fire, the pterosaur didn't even care about the temptation of food. It immediately looked for a place to hide. In its panic, it fell off the stone table. If it hadn't spread its wings to cushion the fall, its newly thawed body wouldn't have been able to withstand the fall. It might even have broken bones. The half-rotten gomphos didn't take too long for Xiao Xian to enslave. It was the fastest out of the three beasts that Xiao Xian tried to enslave. However, under Xiao Xian's control, the half-rotten gomphos' bones started to fall apart as it walked. It was like a malfunctioning machine that couldn't be controlled accurately. It's not working if it's not active enough. As expected, it was because of the active bones. No wonder the monsters that the people from Rock Hill City made weren't rotten. Although they looked a little strange, it was obvious that they had been processed. The people who enslaved the monsters seemed to value the quality of the monsters. After Xiao Xian cracked the secret of the mysterious desert monsters, Xiao Xian also told everyone the secret during a meeting with the Yinjiao's higher-ups. However, not everyone could use this method to enslave a dead beast. Other than Xiao Xian, the excited Zheng Luo, Duo Kong, and the two retired shamans all failed. Guize didn't try because he was researching a type of herb. Therefore, among the people in the Yinjiao tribe who knew the secret, only Xiao Xian was able to successfully enslave a beast using this method. After learning that the ancient beast that Xiao Xian brought back was alive, the Yinjiao people were very curious. The other ice cubes were either melted or turned into fertilizer. Only a few special ones were kept in good condition. The two retired shamans found a cave on a high mountain to store them. They said they wanted to keep them as a memento for the future generations of Yinjiao to see. After all, these were things from a long, long time ago. They might even be older than their ancestors. But now, they heard that one of them was alive. The two retired shamans couldn't wait to see this strange little monster. According to Duo Kong, it looked like a bird but wasn't a bird. For the past few days, Xiao Xian had been training the pterosaur in the secret underground room. After all, it was an ancient beast. Even if it was small, it couldn't be underestimated. After the pterosaur's rapid recovery, Xiao Xian had already seen its ferocity. It wouldn't be good if he let it out and let it attack his own people. Therefore, when the group of people ran to the flaming river castle and followed Xiao Xian to the secret underground room and opened the door, the first thing they smelled was the stench of blood and a foul odor. Xiao Xian also felt that the smell was very strong, but before he could train the pterosaur properly, he could only keep it this way. On the stone table, There was a piece of meat that had been bitten. It looked like it had eaten a lot. The water moonstones on the wall were still lit up. In the corner, there was a birdcage made of wrought tan. The birdcage didn't have a door and was empty inside. There was even feces at the bottom of the cage. If they only relied on their hearing, they wouldn't be able to tell where the pterosaur was hiding. But with the fire seed's aura, they could sense its presence. Under the table, in the shadows, there was a figure that looked like a bat hanging upside down on the edge of the table. Because of the angle and the light, it was difficult for the people standing at the door to see it. Chapter 710. The pterosaur had always been vigilant of its surroundings. Although it had grown closer to Xiao Xian, who had been feeding it for the past few days, it was still mostly afraid of him. After a few days, the pterosaur had mostly recovered to the state it was in before it was frozen. Its reflexes and senses were much sharper. When there was movement at the door of the secret room, it could sense that Xiao Xian wasn't the only one there. There were many other unfamiliar presences around, which was why it hid so quickly. It didn't learn this method of hiding from bats. When it used to live in the forest, it would also hide in the bushes when it encountered danger. It would hide behind leaves or dense branches. After all, it was small in size, unlike the large pterosaurs that dominated the sky. Yes, during this time, Xiao Xian realized that this pterosaur might have been a small pterosaur. He probably wouldn't be able to see the large pterosaurs that were comparable to Cha-Cha. When Xiao Xian pulled the pterosaur out from under the table, the others gathered around the table to take a closer look at this ancient creature. "This is the pterosaur you were talking about." Zhang Luo looked at the pterosaur on the table. "It looks really strange. It doesn't look like a bird or a bat. Did it really come from a long time ago?" Ao wanted to reach out and pull at its wings, but it dodged. It could feel the power of the Yinjiao fire seed. It could feel other Yinjiao people that were similar to it. Although they looked different, their presences were similar. Same kind? That was its first thought. Although it didn't understand why these guys looked so different from it, it knew what to do. Xiao Xian had been training it for the past few days. He used his actions to teach it that if it attacked someone with a similar fire seed aura, it would be punished. That was why it didn't dare to attack. It could only hide and watch the people around it vigilantly. It's hard to believe that it's still alive after being frozen for so long. It's so small. Duo Kong gestured with his hand. It wasn't even as big as the 2 Gomphos he had given to Xiao Xian. What an amazing life force. Since we found one, Xian, what do you think happened to the other beasts that lived in that era? The retired old shaman stroked his beard. From the insects and beasts in the ice and the revived pterosaur, the ferocious beasts of that era might be very different from those of today. Yes, the ferocious beasts back then were indeed different from the ones now. But as for why they disappeared, I don't know. However, I have some ideas these days, Xiao Xian said. The Yinjiao people didn't ask Xiao Xian how he knew all this because they didn't think it was important. Even if they did, Xiao Xian would say that it was his ancestors who told him. They would definitely believe him. To them, what was important was what Xiao Xian said, not where Xiao Xian learned all this. When they heard Xiao Xian say this, the 2 retired shamans became interested. The others also looked at Xiao Xian, waiting for Xiao Xian to continue. Xiao Xian said that the pterosaur and the other ferocious beasts might have lived in an era earlier than Yinjiao's ancestors. This was something they couldn't imagine. They couldn't imagine what it was like back then, and what kind of status did the people of that era have. Tell me, why do you think they disappeared? Maybe it's because of the fire seed, Xiao Xian said. Fire seed? The others were confused. What did this have to do with the fire seed? I found that this pterosaur was very afraid of the fire seed's flames. On the contrary, although it would avoid the flames of ordinary firewood, it didn't have such a strong reaction. When Xiao Xian tried that special enslavement method, he discovered this phenomenon. He tested it a few more times in the following days, but the results were the same every time. Afraid of the fire seed's flames? Other ferocious beasts would be fine, but didn't you say that it was able to recover because of the fire seed's power? Moreover, it also has the aura of Yinjiao's fire seed in its body. Why would it be afraid? The others didn't understand. People from different tribes would reject the fire seeds of other tribes, but people or beasts with the same fire seed's power shouldn't have such a reaction. For example, the engraved pterosaurs in the tribe shouldn't be afraid of Yin Jiao's fire seed. Regarding this, I think it should know that my fire seed's flames can't hurt it, but it reacted with fear. It seems to be an instinctive reaction. As long as the fire seed's flames appear, it will desperately try to escape and hide. I'm guessing that before it was frozen, it saw something related to the fire seed. It seemed to be a conditioned reflex, and when it sensed the fire seed, it wanted to avoid it. Wait, the two shamans took out pens and animal skin scrolls at the same time and quickly recorded something. Then they said to Xiao Xian, "Continue." It was a professional reaction. Even after retirement, the two old men were still very interested in things related to history. Even if Xiao Xian said it was just a guess, they would still record it down. So what if it couldn't be proven? Maybe the descendants of Yin Jiao would be able to find the answer. After looking at the two old men's notes, Xiao Xian continued, "If, and I'm saying if, this pterosaur had seen the fire seed before it was frozen, and it wasn't long before it was frozen, then its reaction would make sense. If it was too long ago, its memory would fade, but if it had seen the fire seed not long before it was frozen, it would be more likely to have such a reaction after it woke up. Generally speaking, the tribe's fire seed would be placed in the fire pit. After all, it was so long ago, and there shouldn't have been any fusion of fire seeds." Everyone nodded. Of course, they understood what Xiao Xian said. Even on the other side of the sea, the fusion of fire seeds couldn't have happened 100,000, a million, or even 10 million years ago. If it really existed at that time, it could only be in the state of a primitive fire seed. Although I don't know what happened at that time, I'm guessing that it was brought about by the primitive fire seed. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been so afraid. The way it looked at the fire seed's flames wasn't unfamiliar. It was as if it had seen something familiar and terrifying. Xiao Xian couldn't sense the pterosaur's thoughts like he could sapphire. That special enslavement method only targeted the bones, not the mind. Xiao Xian really didn't know what the pterosaur was thinking. He could only judge and guess based on some details. Everyone accepted Xiao Xian's explanation. In their hearts, the fire seed was the most powerful thing in the world. If there was anything that could make all the beasts that lived in that ancient era disappear, it was probably the fire seed. They couldn't accept other reasons. Was there anything more powerful than the fire seed? They didn't believe it. However, guesses are just guesses. There are still many things that don't make sense. But no one knows what happened at that time except for this one. Xiao Xian pointed at the pterosaur on the stone table, who was still vigilantly looking around. Because he had used the enslavement method before, Xiao Xian wasn't confident that he could use the same method he used to enslave Sapphire again. The difference between the two methods was too great. If he wasn't careful, the pterosaur would explode. If that happened, not even a bone would be left. Moreover, that was something that happened a long time ago. There was no need to figure it out. They weren't archaeologists. If they had the energy, they might as well dig a river and build a house by the flaming river. The Yinjiao people were just curious. They didn't intend to pursue the matter. You must take good care of it. Xian, if you can't take care of it, you can let us two old men do it. It has seen a fire seed from a long, long time ago. It's an ancient beast that lived longer than our ancestors. It's alive. Before leaving the secret room, the two retired shamans looked back at the stone table reluctantly. Among everyone here, other than Xiao Xian, the two old men were the most interested in the pterosaur. According to the two shamans, they wanted to make the pterosaur their tribe's mascot. Xiao Xian didn't think that way. The pterosaur wasn't big, but it had a ferocious temperament. Mascot. It was good enough that it didn't hurt people. After everyone left, Xiao Xian looked at the pterosaur that had jumped down from the stone table and glided to the ground to look for food. Based on its performance today, they should be able to bring it out in a few days. 5 days later, Xiao Xian carried a cage made of new bronze and left the secret underground room. The cage was covered with a thin layer of cloth, and there were some holes in the cloth. The people outside could not see the situation inside the cage through those small holes, but inside the cage, there was a pair of eyes looking out curiously through the holes. Xiao Xian didn't open the cage in the flaming river castle. Instead, he carried the cage all the way out of the trading point and walked over the flaming river bridge to Yinjiao's headquarters. There were people from the Flaming Horn tribe, the Taiha tribe, the Drumming tribe, the Rain tribe, and some from the surrounding tribes. There were even a few travelers who came from afar. Digging the river required manpower. Not all of these people were from Yinjiao and Taiha. After all, there were other things to do in other places. Taiha was still under construction, so they had limited manpower. That was why they could only hire some people. Those who were strong enough and willing to work could also trade their labor for things from Yinjiao. Yinjiao even provided 2 meals a day. There were other travelers who wanted to join, but they were too late. They already had enough manpower and were just starting work. The stone bridge directly blocked the flaming river surface. If they wanted to travel upstream and downstream, it would be very troublesome. That was why they planned to dig a river that bypassed the fossilized area and connected downstream. It was a big project, but they weren't in a hurry. Yinjiao had dug a man-made lake before, so they had some experience in this area. They didn't find it troublesome. When Xiao Xian arrived, they were busy digging. Xiao Xian gave them a fearsome beast he brought from the trading point as an extra for their lunch. He asked about the progress of digging the river and whether there were any problems. When he heard from the person in charge that everything was going smoothly, Xiao Xian didn't stay for long. He carried the cage and walked towards the flaming river bridge. "What's that in the great elder's hand?" a Yinjiao warrior asked his companion as he watched Xiao Xian leave. "I don't know, but I can feel the energy of Yinjiao's fire seed. That's strange. Did the great elder imprint another fearsome beast? How big is that cage? The one inside is even smaller. How can it be a fearsome beast? What else can it be if it's not a fearsome beast? How can the great elder just imprint a normal beast?" "That's true. Sigh. We'll know in the future. The great elder will definitely let out." Chapter 711. Xiao Xian carried the cage back to the headquarters. He found a secluded place and opened the cage. The moment he lifted the cloth, the pterosaur eagerly climbed out. When Xiao Xian walked over, the pterosaur had seen the situation outside through the gaps in the cloth covering the cage. It had also smelled the familiar scent of the forest. Although it was different from what it remembered, as long as it was a forest, it was very excited. After being locked up in the underground chamber for so long, facing the water moonstones and the surrounding stone walls every day, the pterosaur was so excited that it wanted to fly at any time. However, when it was in the cage, it didn't dare to move. If it did, Xiao Xian would forcibly suppress it. After that, it learned to be obedient. Before the cage was opened, it didn't dare to jump around. When it stepped on the green grass, it lowered its head and sniffed the grass. It pecked at it, then flapped its wings and flew up. It wasn't clear if it was because of the pterosaur or if it was just like that, but when it flew, it was obvious that it wasn't as agile as Cha-Cha and the other birds that were good at flying. After flying to a tree, it stood high up and looked down at the forest and grass below. It also saw the river not far away. It flapped its wings and looked at Xiao Xian. It didn't dare to run around. If it wasn't careful, it might be controlled midway and fall to its death. Therefore, after being released from the cage, the pterosaur looked at Xiao Xian for a while. Seeing that Xiao Xian wasn't angry, it continued to fly. Due to its small size, it didn't pose much of a hindrance in moving through the forest. Its original color was a mix of green and brown with some other colors. This combination of colors was very suitable for hiding in the branches. Xiao Xian also noticed that it had started to learn to hide its aura. It wasn't its own aura. Hiding one's aura was a hunting skill that it had mastered long ago. It was now learning to hide the aura of the Yinjiao fire seed that had fused into its bone marrow. In the future, it might be able to master the way to control its aura even faster. Once it had mastered its control, as long as it deliberately hid itself, other than Xiao Xian, it would be difficult for anyone to discover it. Sometimes, some small-sized beasts could not be underestimated. They could be more dangerous than those large-sized beasts. Xiao Xian didn't bring it to the tribe's residential area. Instead, he let it roam in the forest at the edge of the forest. There was a sentry tower here. After patrolling, the patrolling soldiers would rest there. Xiao Xian saw that the pterosaur's performance was not bad after it came out, so he tried to bring it over. During this period of time, it had already understood some simple instructions. Therefore, when Xiao Xian signaled it to follow, it did not care about the insects hiding behind the leaves. It immediately turned around and glided through the forest, following Xiao Xian. Great Elder! A group of people who were resting under the forest stood up and said they had just finished patrolling and were resting here. After resting, they would continue patrolling until someone came to replace them. After the patrol team greeted Xiao Xian, they looked at another figure. Xiao Xian pointed at the pterosaur resting on a tree nearby and said to the patrol team, "It might be active around here recently. You guys keep an eye on it. Don't be careless. It's fierce." The patrol team looked over. The bird, resting on the tree, was also looking at them. Its pupils shrank into a vertical oval, looking a little sharp. Experienced hunters could tell what kind of beast and animal was from its eyes. Some herbivores that were hunted by predators had horizontal pupils, while some predators that were good at ambushing had vertical pupils. Not to mention the circular pupils or other shapes of pupils. This method of identification was very limited, but it was also a method that experienced hunters liked to teach newbies. It didn't matter if this bird was fierce or not. At least they didn't treat it as a harmless herbivore. After notifying the patrol team, Xiao Xian went up to the watchtower to inform the people on the watchtower. The pterosaur was waiting on the tree branch until it saw Xiao Xian appear on the watchtower. It then flapped its wings and flew up to rest on the top of the watchtower. Xiao Xian was talking to the people on the watchtower when Duo Kong came over to call him. "I saw you just now. Come, let's go take a look at the Taiha tribe. I heard that they're almost done with the houses and farmland today. We can discuss hunting now." The Taiha tribe definitely had a hunt when they came here. There were naturally places to hunt. After all, this was a huge forest. Yinjiao's 6 hunting routes didn't cover much of it, and this was only the nearby ones. The Yinjiao hadn't set foot in much of the forest further away. However, if the Taiha tribesmen wanted to open up a new hunting route, it would take more than a day or two. That was why the Taiha tribesmen had been following the Flaming Horn tribesmen to familiarize themselves with the forest. As for which direction they would go, they had not decided yet. Xiao Xian heard this, and since he didn't have anything to do, he followed Duo Kong. However, he didn't bring the pterosaur with him. Instead, he let it roam around nearby. Even if Xiao Xian went to the Taiha tribe, he could still sense its location and control it. Xiao Xian had tested the effective distance, and the Taiha tribe was still within this distance. After Xiao Xian and Duo Kong left, the Yinjiao warriors on the watchtower couldn't hold back their curiosity and stuck their heads out to look at the top of the watchtower. They hadn't seen any of the tribe's birds recently, not counting the ducks and animals. After returning from the sea, the Cha-Cha would often go to the forest to look for food. Perhaps it was bored of life at sea, so it came back to play with all its might. Sometimes, it wouldn't even be seen for a few days. Gigu's snow falcon, on the other hand, was too fast and disappeared with a whoosh. Most of the time, it stayed near the residential area. The people on the watchtower looked at this strange bird. Yes, in the eyes of the Yinjiao people, anything with wings was a bird. It was just that this bird looked different from the ones they had seen before, so they were curious. "I heard that the Grand Elder brought it back from the sea," someone said. "A bird from the sea? It really looks strange." The pterosaur probably didn't like being stared at, so it spread its wings and glided down from the watchtower. The watchtower was close to the flaming river. Standing on the watchtower, they could see the river through the forest. The pterosaur that jumped down from the watchtower glided all the way to the river. "Ah, it flew away. It can't have gone far, right? Look, it's flying into the river." On the other side, the pterosaur that was gliding overflapped its wings twice, then retracted them and plunged into the river. "It's a duck? It can swim?" The Yinjiao warriors on the watchtower were shocked. Their tribe's ducks didn't look like this. "Something's wrong. Look, what's going on over there? Let's go. Quick, quick, quick." The panicked voices of the people on the watchtower alerted the patrol team resting below. They all rushed towards the flaming river. The people on the watchtower saw the water splashing, as if there was an intense battle going on under the water. Of course, they were worried about the strange bird that dived into the water. After all, there were many piranhas in the flaming river, and that strange bird was brought here by the Grand Elder. If something happened to it, they wouldn't be able to explain it to the Grand Elder. Everything happened too quickly under their noses. By the time they got there, they were already a step too late. There were already bloodstains on the water. Xiao Xian, who was walking towards the Tai River with Duo Kong, paused. "What's wrong?" Duo Kong asked. "Wait a minute. I'll go back and take a look. There's a small matter over there." "What small matter?" "I'll go take a look too." Duo Kong didn't think that Xiao Xian would go back to take a look. It wouldn't be a small matter. When the two of them reached the flaming river, the people on the watchtower and the patrol team were all gathered there. "What happened?" Duo Kong strode forward. The people immediately moved aside, revealing a bloody mess on the ground. It wasn't a pterosaur that dived into the river. It was a piranha that was half the size of a human. At this moment, the piranha was a bloody mess. There wasn't a single piece of good meat left, including its scales. Its dorsal fin had been forcefully torn off, a section of its tail was missing, its eyes were gone, and even its gills were torn out. It wasn't bitten by a piranha. Although the main wound wasn't caused by a piranha. Duo Kong had seen piranhas bite prey before. It was different from this. This. What's going on?" Duo Kong asked the people around him. The people on the watchtower and the patrol team all looked at the strange bird that was shaking the water off its wings. Duo Kong looked at the pterosaur on the tree, then at the pitiful piranha in front of him. Finally, he looked at the Yinjiao soldiers around him. His eyes were filled with disbelief. It did this. The people around him nodded in unison. It was true. They saw it with their own eyes. When they fished the fish out, the strange bird was still biting and tearing at its flesh. As for the person they were worried about, nothing happened to him. Perhaps it was because the strange bird had sensed Xiao Xian's arrival, but it was still glaring fiercely at the fisherman. Suddenly, it loosened its beak and flew up the tree. Duo Kong opened his mouth and couldn't help but tremble. A beast. It was definitely a beast. It was so fierce, how could it not be? After hunting for so many years, Duo Kong had rarely seen such a small beast. There might be many in other parts of the forest, but usually they were mostly large beasts. Some small beasts were hard to find even if they hid. So, when he saw such a small beast that seemed to be even more fierce than a normal beast, he was shocked. Of course, it wasn't called a beast based on its fierceness. It was called a beast based on its strength. All this time, Duo Kong had only seen it as a duck that ate and drank for free in the tribe. But he didn't expect. Duo Kong looked at the piranha on the ground that was so badly mutilated that it couldn't be seen. He swallowed and said to Xiao Xian, "I think I might know why it could withstand being frozen for so many years without dying." Chapter 712. They knew that this pterosaur was fierce. Although they didn't know how strong it was, they had already classified it as a species that needed to be closely watched. For the next few days, Xiao Xian would let it roam around the area and let it search for food by itself. It ate flying beetles, flying stone squirrels, and even stone worms that dug up from the ground. When it couldn't finish eating, it would grab some and hide them. This also explained why there were all kinds of insects and small animals in the ice floes. It was probably the pterosaur that had hidden them. But at that time, due to some accident, it was frozen along with its food. Of course, these few days weren't completely smooth. Sometimes, it would reveal its wild and untamed side, and even wanted to secretly fly away. This fellow was amenable to force, but not persuasion. Gentle methods couldn't teach it a lesson. So every time, Xiao Xian directly used force to suppress it. After a few times, it became much more obedient. However, another reason why it didn't run around was that it knew that it was very dangerous outside. This was no longer the world it was familiar with. The sky was no longer the pterosaur's world. It was weak alone in an unfamiliar environment. Rather than flying around randomly, it was better to stay in a place where there were same kind. At least every time it encountered danger and was attacked by other birds, it would fly back, and the patrolling Yinjiao would definitely help it deal with it. It wasn't afraid of one or two birds, but it was much more troublesome to deal with a flock of birds. It could only rely on the Yinjiao. What made Xiao Xin curious was that this pterosaur would fight with Gigu's snow falcon every time it saw it. In terms of flying speed, it couldn't compare to the snow falcon, but its mouth was fast. When its wings couldn't keep up, it would use its mouth to peck and pull out a few feathers from a snow falcon. Of course, it was also injured. Its feathers weren't as dense as those of other birds, so the injuries were obvious, but it recovered quickly. Later, when Gigu saw that they often fought, he let the snow falcon stay on a mountain where they lived. As for this pterosaur, Xiao Xian didn't bring it up the mountain. After all, with its wild nature, who knew when it would bite the children on the mountain? However, this pterosaur actually got along well with Cha-Cha. It would never provoke Cha-Cha. It had shown that right from the start. Perhaps it knew that it was no match for Cha-Cha, or for some other reason, but it had never offended her. Most of the time, it would even take the initiative to approach Cha-Cha, especially when it was in danger. However, at the beginning, it would often be kicked aside by Cha-Cha. If it wasn't for Xiao Xian's warning, Cha-Cha would have stomped it to death. It was so annoying. But just when Xiao Xian thought that the pterosaur and Cha-Cha didn't get along, the two of them started to coexist peacefully. Later, Xiao Xian found out the reason. The pterosaur was helping Cha-Cha clean the parasites on her body. It wasn't just the long-haired beasts that lived in the forest. Many birds had parasites on their bodies. Some birds would deal with them themselves. For example, they would use ants to remove the parasites on their bodies, or they would rub on the juice of plants that repelled the parasites. Sometimes, Cha-Cha would rub on trees or other plants. Xiao Xian couldn't help it with this. Xiao Xian didn't know how to concoct a repellent. If the parasites weren't removed, Cha-Cha's feathers would all fall off. Moreover, birds in their natural state always had their own ways of dealing with the parasites, so Xiao Xian didn't intervene. But now, with the pterosaur helping Cha-Cha solve this problem, it seemed to be very familiar with this kind of thing. Could it be that they also did this a long time ago? Xiao Xian didn't know the answer to this question, but it was a good thing that the two of them could get along peacefully. Later on, Cha-Cha would also share some of the prey it brought back with the pterosaur. It was like a big brother taking care of his little brother. Both of them were willing to do this. The man-made river channel was still being excavated. Xiao Xian would also help out when he was free. In the plan, this river channel had to go around the area where the king stoneworm lived, so it was a huge project. Everyone was also paying attention to the desert, but they weren't that worried in the short term. Another reason why the people from Rock Hill City didn't come out was that the monsters they created had an effective range of control. Unless the people controlling the monsters voluntarily walked out of the desert, as long as they stayed in the desert, the puppet-like monsters wouldn't come out. In other words, as long as Rock Hill City set their sights on the sea, they wouldn't have to worry about the monsters coming out to attack people in other places. On this day, Xiao Xian and Zheng Luo were discussing the underground passage left behind by the king stoneworm when someone came to tell them that the feather tribe had come. The chief wanted Xiao Xian to go over to discuss something. How rare they actually came at this time. Xiao Xian rolled up the design in his hand. They had always sealed off the underground passage left behind by the king stoneworm, including this stone forest. They wouldn't let anyone get close. So many people didn't know there was an underground passage that led to the other side of the flaming river. You go over. I'll keep an eye here. Zheng Luo took the beast skin scroll from Xiao Xian and said. He wasn't familiar with the feather tribe and wasn't interested, so there was no need for him to go over. All right, let me know if you have any questions. Xiao Xian followed the warrior who came looking for him to the headquarters. At the same time, he asked about the feather tribe's leader and their purpose. Xiao Xian thought the leader of the feather tribe would be Gu Ji, who he knew. However, he didn't expect the warrior who came to him to say that the chief of the feather tribe would be leading the team himself. Otherwise, the chief wouldn't have asked Xiao Xian to come. Is there something urgent? Xiao Xian asked. It doesn't look like it. They didn't look like they were in a hurry, but the warrior paused, then said, I think I heard them say they wanted to go into the forest to catch birds, to replenish their bird supply. Replenish their bird supply? Yes, I think the chief has the same idea. Grand Elder, we don't have many birds in our tribe. Especially after what happened to Wu He and the others. Some people in Yinjiao had been thinking about whether they could strengthen their aerial defenses. Even if it was just an early warning system, there were only a limited number of watchtowers. Back then, some people suggested going to the Hui tribe to get some giant mountain eagle eggs to hatch, but more people objected. Not everyone could control a giant mountain eagle. The Hui tribe had accumulated experience over generations, and they could get along well with the giant mountain eagles. Other people might not be able to do it. Just look at Cha-Cha. It grew up in Yinjiao, but other than Xiao Xian, it didn't listen to anyone else, including Old Ko. It was better to forget about such a difficult bird. Let's switch to an easier one. Now that the feather tribe was here, some people in Yinjiao began to think of a solution. The feather tribe was an expert in bird taming. They knew what birds were suitable for different purposes. The few large tribes in the central region were busy recently. The Mang tribe and the Eight Limbs tribe had always been in an alliance. They seemed to be planning something, and the feather tribe couldn't get involved. The Hui and Tianshan tribes were in the grasslands, too far away from them. The Thousand Mast tribe was busy recruiting followers. Ever since they merged their fire seed, the Thousand Mast tribe began to protect the small and medium tribes that depended on them. With the example of failed merging, the Thousand Mast tribe's actions made the small and medium tribes feel more at ease. After the Feather tribe merged their fire seed, they began to plan some things that they had always wanted to do but never realized. Their tribe hadn't replenished their bird supply for a long, long time. While Xiao Xian was heading towards the headquarters at the foot of the mountain where the Yinjiao tribe lived, a few young people of the Feather tribe gathered together to discuss what kind of birds to catch after entering the forest. As they were talking, one of them stopped and elbowed the person next to him. "Look, what kind of bird is that?" They looked over and saw a strange-looking bird resting on a tree not far away, staring at them. Chapter 713. Is that a bird domesticated by the Yinjiao tribe? Someone was confused. I think so. I've never seen a bird like that. Maybe it was caught in the forest by the Yinjiao. Another young girl with colorful feathers guessed. No, it's not a domesticated bird. Hong Shi looked at the strange bird resting on the branch and said with certainty, "That's right." A slightly older young man beside Hong Shi agreed. "That bird is too wild. It's completely different from domesticated birds. That bird looks dangerous." Hong Shi stared at the bird not far away and frowned. The people of the Feather tribe could judge the general information of the bird at a glance. Although they had never seen a bird like that before, they could make a preliminary judgment from its shape, and subtle movements. "Why don't I try?" A young man was eager to try. This time, they came to Yinjiao with the team to go into the more dangerous forest to catch more birds. They wanted to replenish the bird species that hadn't changed for a long time. The bird species in the tribe were still too few. Some of the new breeds were not satisfied. Moreover, there hadn't been any changes for a long time. This was not a good sign for the Feather tribe. Fortunately, the fusion of the fire seed had broken the time limit. Under the chief's order, they started to look for new bird species. For the Feather tribe, this kind of replenishment was very necessary. In the past, they would replenish their stock, but it might only be one species every few years. This time, however, the chief personally led the team and planned to catch more species of birds to bring back. This time, he brought a group of young people with great potential to train them. After all, the future of the tribe depended on these young people. The new Feather tribe would start a change with them. It had to be said that the chief of the Feather tribe had high expectations for these young people. These young people were also capable. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been selected from so many people in the tribe. The young man who said he wanted to give it a try was talented in taming birds. Before he had awakened his totem power, he had begun to tame birds. Looking at the feathers on his head, one could tell what kind of birds he was taming. The colorful feathers of different lengths on his head were all proof of his ability. Therefore, he believed that even if it was the first time he met a bird, even if it was a wild bird that was difficult to tame, it would become obedient in front of him. After all, it wasn't a special bird like the giant mountain eagle. It just looked strange, so he was confident that he could handle it. Therefore, after he spoke, the others were also looking forward to it. She looked at the strange bird on the tree and did not say anything to stop it. In fact, he also wanted to give it a try, but to be on the safe side, he did not mention it quickly, so the others stood up. However, she always felt that the bird was very strange. Not only did it look strange, but it also gave him a strange feeling. He had once suffered in the hands of the Yinjiao people. As a precaution, she reminded the young man when he lifted his feet and walked over. Ming Lu, be careful. Don't be careless. Yes, I know, the young man named Ming Lu said. But even though he said so, he didn't really take it to heart. He had domesticated dozens of birds of different sizes, if not 100. He should be able to handle such a small thing. Besides, he didn't want to tame it directly. He just wanted to touch it and play with it. This was Yinjiao's territory. This could only be a bird raised by the Yinjiao people. They would not go to the extent of getting into a conflict with the Yinjiao people just to tame this bird. The young man moved step by step toward the trees. Those trees were planted here after the Yinjiao people moved here. Firstly, it was to prevent the soil from flowing away quickly. Secondly, it was also to provide a place for the Yinjiao soldiers guarding the shore to rest. After all, sometimes the sun was too strong and they didn't have a place to rest. Although they had houses, they preferred to stay under the shade of the trees. This way, they could pay attention to their surroundings. At this moment, the pterosaur was resting on one of the trees. It had been here from time to time for the past 2 days. Xiao Xian didn't allow it to go up the mountain, so it could only roam around the riverbank at the foot of the mountain. The people guarding the riverbank already knew about this strange bird. Xiao Xian called it pterosaur, so they thought that Xiao Xian named it pterosaur. Sometimes, they even called it pterosaur. At this moment, the people guarding the riverbank saw the feathered tribesmen walking over. They hurried forward and asked, "What are you doing?" One of the Yinjiao soldiers wanted to stop the man who was walking towards the tree, but she stopped him. "Don't worry, we won't do anything rash. We're just curious about the strange bird on the tree. We don't have any intention of snatching it. This young man from our tribe is just going to greet the bird. You know that the feather tribe can communicate with birds." But the Yinjiao soldier still wanted to say something, but the other feather tribesmen were impatient. Wasn't it just a bird? That bird didn't have any beautiful feathers. If you didn't look closely, you'd think it didn't have any feathers. Plus, it looked strange. If it weren't for the fact that they'd never seen this kind of bird before, they wouldn't have bothered to look at it. No buts. She said that we're just going to greet it. You Yinjiao are on guard against this? TSK. As long as it's a bird, we're confident that we can communicate with it, the young man from the feather tribe said proudly. They weren't confident in other things, but in this case, anyone who doubted their ability was looking down on the feather tribe. The Yinjiao soldiers who came over looked at each other. Of course, they knew that these feather tribesmen wouldn't dare do anything to offend the Yinjiao. After all, the feather tribe still needed the Yinjiao to bring them into the forest to catch birds. However, they weren't worried about the feather tribesmen doing anything to the pterosaur. On the contrary, they were worried about what the pterosaur would do to the feather tribe. But one of the Yinjiao soldiers opened his mouth. He saw the feather tribesmen's dissatisfaction, as if stopping them from communicating with the bird was looking down on the feather tribe. In the end, he swallowed his words. A Yinjiao soldier behind him pulled at his companion who wanted to say something, indicating that he shouldn't say anything. The Yinjiao soldier sighed. Fine, don't say anything. However, he felt uncomfortable holding back his words. Seeing that the Yinjiao soldier finally stopped talking nonsense, the feather tribesmen were satisfied. They signaled the person who stopped halfway to continue. Quick, Ming Lu, don't let fly. I saw it flapping its wings. Don't worry, I'll definitely take it down. Ming Lu waved his hand nonchalantly and continued walking towards the bird. The closer he got, the slower his steps became. The aura around him also calmed down. The totemic power didn't appear out of nowhere. It was as if everything happened naturally. The feather tribesmen could make birds feel close to them if they wanted to. Therefore, when the feather tribesmen revealed their totemic tattoos, They didn't feel the same rush of battle as the Yin-Jiao soldiers. Instead, they seemed to be communicating with each other silently. The fancy totemic tattoos on their bodies were also a form of communication with the bird. It was just like how birds in nature communicated with each other, not only through their voices, but also through their feathers and other actions. Courtship, defense, intimidation, or even some ordinary communication all involved this silent method of communication. A few Yin-Jiao soldiers looked at this scene curiously. This was the first time they saw the feather tribesmen in a non-combat state. They used their totemic power to this extent, but it wasn't for battle. It was really novel. The totemic tattoos on the surface of Ming Lu's body weren't motionless like the other tribesmen. Instead, they were constantly moving, as if following a certain set of rules like waves. This was because Ming Lu was too young and not strong enough. After merging with the fire seed, his body hadn't completely merged with the fire seed's power. Therefore, he couldn't use this ability to its fullest potential. If Hongxi was here, flames might even appear on the surface of his body. However, everyone, including Hongxi, felt that Ming Lu's current state was enough. Didn't he see that the strange bird was already attracted to him? This could be considered as a successful first step. As long as he could attract the bird's attention, he would have more confidence in succeeding. If he couldn't even attract the bird's attention, he wouldn't be able to do anything else. 10 steps, 8 steps, 6 steps, Ming Lu was getting closer and closer to the tree. As he walked, other than the changes on his body, his throat was moving rapidly. The Yin-Jiao soldiers could hear some vague sounds, but they couldn't understand what it meant. However, it seemed like he was communicating with the bird. The Yin-Jiao soldiers looked at each other in surprise. Was he talking about it already? Could it be that what the feather tribesmen said was true? That they could really communicate with the strange bird? But didn't the Grand Elder say that it wasn't a bird and that they should treat it like any other fearsome beast in the forest? While the Yin-Jiao soldiers were thinking, Ming Lu was already 3 steps away from the tree. At this moment, Ming Lu took every step very slowly. Although he was arrogant and proud, he wouldn't be careless at this moment. After all, he had to do what he had to do. When it was time to slow down, he couldn't rush. Moreover, the others and the Yin-Jiao soldiers were all looking at him. He couldn't afford to fail. However, the closer he got to the strange bird, the stranger Ming Lu felt. Although the strange bird on the tree kept its attention on him and wasn't scared away, he realized that the strange bird didn't react the way he expected it to. Although it didn't fly away, it didn't show any interest in getting close to him either. It maintained its previous posture. Those vertical pupils were staring at him with the same gaze. There was no change in its gaze at all. It was as if all his previous actions were useless. How could this be? It shouldn't be. Ming Lu was puzzled. He was confident and didn't suspect anything else. He was just wondering if this bird was retarded. As long as it was a bird, after all he had done, it should have some other reaction, right? Even if it refused to communicate with him, it should have some reaction. However, this strange bird maintained its initial posture. Those eyes made Ming Lu feel inexplicably uneasy. Should I dance? Ming Lu thought. In the feather tribesmen, dancing with birds was a common thing. It was also a way to improve communication. Of course, to others it looked like dancing. In fact, it was just a mimicry of the bird's behavior. Just as Ming Lu was thinking about dancing, Hongxi, who had been staring at the strange bird on the tree, suddenly shouted, "Ming Lu, be careful." Ah! A blood-curdling scream came from the foot of the mountain where Yin Jiao lived. Many people on the mountain looked down. That scream didn't sound like someone from their tribe. When the other feather tribesmen in the Yin Jiao tribe heard that scream, they thought that the Yin Jiao people had attacked. Even the chief of the feather tribe, who was chatting with Gigu, stood up from his wooden chair. With his hearing, he could hear the sounds at the foot of the mountain, even if he was on the mountain. Ming Lu's scream was too loud. The feather tribesman could tell from his voice that Ming Lu must have been injured. That was why he couldn't help but scream. In Yin Jiao territory, only the Yin Jiao people could hurt the feather tribesman. In an instant, the feather tribesmen's expressions changed. They hurried down the mountain. Gigu and the rest didn't know what had happened. However, if the Yin Jiao people really hurt the feather tribesmen, they would naturally protect their own people. So what if they were in the wrong? If they wanted to reprimand them, they had to wait until there was no one else around. In front of outsiders, as long as it wasn't a serious matter, the Yinjiao people would take care of it for them. This was what the tribe did all the time. When Xiao Xian returned, he saw a group of people running in that direction. He heard the screams too. However, compared to the others, he knew better than anyone else what had happened. That was why he wasn't in a hurry. At the foot of the mountain, beside the flaming river, a group of people had gathered there. The feather tribesmen with feathers on their heads were all gathered there, asking questions about what had happened. From the looks of it, if it was proven that the Yinjiao people did it, there would be a fight. However, Hongxi and the rest looked very embarrassed. Their faces were red, but they didn't say anything. It was the Yinjiao warriors guarding the river that told Gigu and the rest about the cause of this incident and the current outcome. After listening to the explanation, Gigu acted as if he didn't see the feather tribesmen's reactions. Instead, he asked the Yinjiao warriors, "Didn't you warn them?" "We did, but they didn't listen. Moreover, they interrupted me before I could finish my sentence." The Yinjiao warrior who couldn't finish his sentence looked aggrieved. He really felt aggrieved. His OCD was acting up. Was it easy for him to hold it in until now? The feather tribesmen said that they were just greeting the strange bird and didn't let us stop them. However, didn't the Grand Elder say that the strange bird wasn't a bird? The feather tribesman, Ming Lu, whose hand was bitten, was speechless. "Why didn't you say it wasn't a bird earlier?" Xiao Xian, who was walking over, pursed his lips. If a peacock fanned its tail, it would be fine if you fanned it at a peacock. What was the point of fanning it at a lizard? It would think that you were provoking it. Wasn't that courting death? Chapter 714. He thought the Yinjiao people had gone too far, but he didn't expect his tribesmen to be so reckless. The chief of the feather tribe felt embarrassed. He knew they couldn't blame the Yinjiao people for this. Judging from Hongxi and the others' reactions, he knew the Yinjiao people were telling the truth. They weren't exaggerating. Why didn't they finish listening to him? On second thought, the feather tribesmen felt that the Yinjiao people were really scheming. They were just waiting to laugh at them. He looked at the wound on Ming Lu's hand. It wasn't serious, but looked scary. However, if Ming Lu hadn't reacted quickly and the strange bird hadn't flown a little slower, Ming Lu's hand would have been bitten off a huge chunk of flesh. Since nothing serious happened, the chief of the feather tribe calmed himself down. He forced a smile and said to Gigu, "Let's continue what we were talking about. Xiao Xian is here too. Let's talk about going into the forest." "You guys go up first. I'll catch up later," said Xiao Xian. The pterosaur that bit Ming Lu had already swam to the surface of the flaming river. However, it didn't dive into the water. Instead, it swam on the surface like a duck. The only difference was that it bent its wings like it was crawling on the ground. At the same time, it stood up like a sail and used the wind to push it forward. It didn't stray too far from the shore. At least there weren't any ferocious fish that it couldn't handle. If anything happened, the Yinjiao people would help. If it strayed too far away, it would be dangerous. Xiao Xian whistled. The pterosaur that was swimming on the surface of the river immediately flew over. The feather tribesmen had strange expressions on their faces when they saw this. Was this really not a bird? It looked like a bird, but it didn't care about their methods at all. The Yinjiao people whistled and ran over. Judging by the way they flapped their wings, it was as if they were afraid something would happen if they were too slow. The feather tribesmen were right. The pterosaur was afraid that it would be suppressed if it was too slow, so when it heard Xiao Xian's whistle, it didn't dare to delay. Xiao Xian held a wing in each hand and looked at it. He didn't find any injuries on the pterosaur's body, so he let go. "Go play by yourself. Don't run too far." The pterosaur cried out, flapped its wings, and flew back into the river. It dove into the water to vent its anger on the fish. Xiao Xian didn't stay long at the foot of the mountain. After all, the people on the mountain were still waiting for him. After Xiao Xian left, the young men of the feather tribe breathed a sigh of relief. They actually wanted to ask Xiao Xian about the strange bird, but they were too embarrassed to do so. After all, they had just made a fool of themselves, and Xiao Xian was in a hurry to go up the mountain, so they didn't have the chance to ask. "Look over there," Someone pointed at a certain spot on the flaming river. The water, there was churning, and there was also the color of blood. That seems to be the place where the strange bird went down. Aren't there many dangerous fish in this river? Won't it be fine if it goes down? It should be fine. Don't you see that the Yin-Jiao people aren't worried? Everyone looked over. As expected, the Yin-Jiao people guarding the flaming river only glanced in that direction. They were very calm, as if they were already used to this scene. Not long after, the strange bird flew out of the water with half a fish in its mouth. The fish was already incomplete, but even so, the incomplete half was still bigger than the strange bird. It could easily fly with the fish in its mouth. Looking at its teeth, they were like hooks. Even if it was just scratched, it would not feel good. Seeing the strange bird fly up the tree and eat the fish, she was instantly relieved. Luckily, he didn't act rashly. Otherwise, the one injured wouldn't be Ming Lu, but him. Actually, what Hongxi didn't know was that if he really did attack, he might not have been injured. Hongxi's fusion level with the fire seed was much higher than Ming Lu's. When he used his totemic power, the fire seed might appear. The pterosaur was very afraid of that. Its first reaction would be to run, let alone attack. However, this topic didn't last long. The young people started complaining about feathers being used as currency. The Flaming River trading point didn't accept feathers. Why couldn't feathers be used as a currency? Especially those beautiful and rare feathers. Weren't they precious? Why didn't everyone like them? The feather tribesmen had always complained about this. At least within their tribe, it was common to exchange feathers for things. However, outside the tribe, this method was not accepted. After all, not everyone had a special liking for birds. In the feather tribe, they needed feathers for power, weddings, and even some important ceremonies. Feathers could be used as decorations and currency in the feather tribe. Another reason why they tamed birds was to satisfy their need for feathers. The feather tribe had a strong desire for beautiful feathers. Most of the birds they raised were birds with beautiful feathers, except for those that were used for special purposes. Beautiful feathers can brighten up their mood. Unfortunately, other tribes didn't have this hobby. Even though the feather tribe had always wanted feathers as a currency, they had never succeeded. However, if Xiaoxian was here, he would definitely recommend them to use this method on the slave masters on the other side of the sea, especially those who called themselves nobles. They liked beautiful and rare things. What the feather tribe couldn't do here, they might succeed on the other side of the sea. On the mountain, Gigu, Xiaoxian, and the feather tribesmen were discussing about entering the forest. This time, Xiaoxian didn't need to bring them. Tao was going to bring some people to hunt, so he would be in charge of this. Of course, they wouldn't bring the feather tribesmen to all their hunting routes. They only chose a route with the most birds. Tao would bring the feather tribesmen there. There were many beautiful birds that the flaming horns were not interested in. They never looked at birds that were small in size and had little meat. However, the feather tribe was interested in these birds. They would catch some birds and bring them back to expand their breeding range to supplement their tribe's bird species. At the same time, the feather tribesmen also agreed to help the Yin-Jiao find some birds that met their requirements. They didn't have to be big, and their tempers weren't too bad either. Otherwise, if they fought all the time in the tribe, how could they survive? They didn't need cha-cha birds either. Yin-Jiao couldn't raise giant mountain eagles. Snow falcons were rare and couldn't be raised on a large scale. The birds they needed to be vigilant and strong. The Yin-Jiao looked down on those that were too weak. They needed to be smart. Those that were too slow were useless. They also didn't need birds that could jump up and down every day. Ta heard a lot about this from the feather tribesmen. They didn't need birds to dance with them every day. How could they have the time to dance with them? They didn't care about their appearance or their voice. As long as they met their requirements, even if they looked like a toad, the Yin-Jiao would still accept them. The Yin-Jiao had a lot of requirements, but since they agreed to help the Yin-Jiao find birds, they would keep their promise unless they couldn't find any suitable ones. After the discussion, Ta led the hunting team and the feather tribesmen into the forest. 20 days later, Xiaoxian was drawing blood from the green-faced fanged beasts. These beasts had gotten fat recently and seemed to be getting used to the life of eating and sleeping. They didn't want to go out. A Yin-Jiao warrior hurried over. "Head elder, The chief wants you to go over. He said Ta, and the others are back. They're back? Xiao Xian finished drawing blood from the remaining beasts and sent the blood to the casting room. Then he went to the Yinjiao residence. He didn't know what kind of birds Ta brought back. Chapter 7:15. When Xiao Xian arrived, he saw a group of people gathered at the foot of the mountain where they lived. They didn't go up the mountain because it was more spacious. Besides, the birds they brought back still needed to be processed. It was too noisy to bring them up the mountain. Before Xiao Xian even got close, he could already hear the sounds of birds chirping. The Feather Tribe's iconic feathered costumes could be seen from afar. Many feather tribesmen held bird cages of various sizes in their hands. They were made of rattan or straw. Different species of birds had different cages, and the shapes of the cages were also different. This was the first time the Yinjiao people had seen so many different kinds of bird cages. It was undeniable that the feather tribesmen cared a lot about appearances. Their cages were even decorated and looked very flashy. They're all back. Xiao Xian asked a warrior who was craning his neck to look inside. Yes, Team Leader Ta and the rest are back. However, they only brought back bird eggs, unlike the feather tribesmen who brought back adult birds. Xiao Xian nodded. Yes, Team Leader Ta and the rest are back. However, they only brought back bird eggs, unlike the feather tribesmen. They only brought back eggs? Were they planning to hatch the eggs themselves? Because they saw Xiao Xian coming over, the people crowded there all made a path for him. Xiao Xian saw the feather tribesmen showing off the birds they caught. Some of them were released directly, probably because they had already started taming them. Most of them were just showing off their cages. The birds the feather tribe caught all had beautiful feathers. They either had gorgeous tail feathers, strange crests, or special feathers on other parts of their bodies. As soon as he saw the birds the feather tribesmen brought back, Xiao Xian was worried that they would recommend flashy but impractical birds to Ta. Although they had said before that they didn't care about appearance, only practicality, no one could be sure until they saw the results. Without looking at the birds the feather tribesmen brought back, Xiao Xian went straight to Ta. Gigu and the others were already there, standing there and listening to Tower. The people of the feather tribe said that the withered leaf birds are active in both day and night, especially at dawn and dusk. They're more active at night than during the day. I think we need to take precautions at night. After all, there are many people now, so there's a lot of restrictions at night. If possible, let's try taming these withered leaf birds. Ta held an animal skin scroll in his hand. Xiao Xian went over to take a look. There was a painting on it. It should have been drawn by the feather tribesmen. Although the painting was still abstract, the main features of the painting could be seen at a glance. Seeing Xiao Xian coming over, Ta directly handed over the animal skin scroll in his hand to let Xiao Xian have a good look. After all, Xiao Xian was only one of the main decision-makers whether or not these withered leaf bird eggs could be kept. Why are they called withered leaf birds? Xiao Xian asked. This name must have been given by the feather tribesmen. They said that these birds look like a pile of withered leaves, and when they hatch, they bury the eggs in the withered leaves. Ta didn't remember the exact words of the feather tribesmen, so he only gave a rough description. Although it wasn't complete, Xiao Xian understood. Generally speaking, the feather tribesmen gave the withered leaf birds this name because of the color of their feathers and the way they hatched. Compared to other birds, withered leaf birds' hatching method was less common. It was more similar to the way reptiles hatch. They would bury their eggs in pre-prepared soil bags. There were withered leaves and branches in the bags. When the leaves were fermented, they would generate heat. The withered leaf birds used the heat from the fermentation to hatch their eggs. Being able to adapt to this method and having a high hatching rate, at least these birds weren't stupid. This made the Yinjiao people a little satisfied. As long as they weren't stupid, they didn't mind at all if they were ugly. Xiao Xian looked at the drawing on the animal skin roll. There were a few concentric circles around the bird's eyes. It looked like a radar. What's that on its head? It stood up like an antenna. The withered leaf bird in the drawing had a long, thin feather on its head. It was more than half the length of its body. Oh, that's the crest of the withered leaf bird. The feather tribesmen didn't like this kind of crest, so they didn't raise them again except for a few hundred years ago. However, they said that these birds are very vigilant. When they sense danger, the crest on their heads will stand up. Also, withered leaf birds have many kinds of calls. They make different calls under different circumstances. It's easy to distinguish them, and they're not suitable for long-distance flight. They only move around in one place, so you don't have to worry about them flying away. So the feather tribesman suggested that we raise withered leaf birds. I think we can give it a try. Ta repeated what the feather tribesman said. He wasn't easily fooled by the feather tribesman, but he agreed with the feather tribesman's reasoning. Why don't the feather tribesmen raise them? Is it really just because they don't look good? Someone asked. Not really, Ta continued. The feather tribesman said that withered leaf birds are noisy. It's not that they're noisy, it's just that they tend to quarrel with other birds. So once they start quarreling, the feather tribesmen will be in a state of chaos. The feather tribesmen raised so many birds. Imagine if all of them started chirping. We don't have any other birds in our tribe, right? Guehi and Cha-Cha definitely won't quarrel with them. That group of ducks basically won't leave the vicinity of the lake now. If we domesticate withered leaf birds, it should be possible. Yeah, we can give it a try. By the way, how big can withered leaf birds grow? Xiao Xian asked. Not big, just this small. Ta gestured with his hand. It was only about 2 palms long, smaller than those ducks. However, he heard that withered leaf birds lived in flocks. Ta brought back 40 to 50 eggs. Even if only half of them hatched, it was enough. They could give it a try. They weren't big, so they couldn't carry people. It was a bit of a pity. However, if withered leaf birds were really like what the feather tribesman said, everyone would be satisfied. Hopefully, they could be useful when there weren't many people around. I talked to the feather tribesmen and asked them to leave a few people behind to help us hatch the eggs. After all, they have experience. I heard that even if they bury the eggs, they still have to look after them every day. It's better to leave them to them. In fact, these eggs were dug out from the mounds that were buried with dead branches and leaves. They didn't all come from the same mound, but from several mounds. 5 to 10 eggs were taken from each mound. If the feather tribesmen didn't have their own skills to protect the eggs, none of these eggs would have hatched. They said that they'll hatch in 10 days. Since the feather tribesmen needed to look after the eggs hatched, and the feather tribesmen needed a few days, they stayed here to observe the adaptation of the birds. So they didn't leave for the time being. After more than 40 withered leaf bird eggs hatched, the feather tribesmen left. Withered leaf bird chicks were birds that matured early. They could walk and look for food as soon as they hatched, saving a lot of effort. This was one of the reasons why Ta chose them. A person with rich experience in rearing was chosen from the animal pen to take care of these newly hatched withered leaf birds. Because the breeder was the one who saw them the most after they hatched and also fed them, these fledglings were very dependent on the breeder. Sometimes they would line up and follow the breeder. When Xiao Xian arrived, he saw the 42 gray-brown fluffy birds following the breeder to the food trough. They probably hadn't hatched for long. Although they could walk, they couldn't fly yet. Why did they look so tired? Xiao Xian asked. The chicks' eyes were half open, and they staggered as they walked. They looked like they hadn't woken up yet. The breeder smiled and explained, "No, they're usually like this. But when they eat, they look more energetic." Sure enough, as soon as they arrived at the food trough, the chicks, who looked like they hadn't woken up yet, started fighting over the food. Seeing these chicks grow so energetic from their fragile state, the breeder was very proud. The feather tribesman also taught him how to mix the food. Sure enough, these withered leaf birds grew well. But this breeder didn't get to be proud for more than 2 days before the chicks abandoned him. The reason was that the pterosaur threw half a fish into the flock. At first, the breeder was worried that these birds wouldn't get used to it. He didn't expect these birds to be so adaptable. Not only that, but the pterosaur also threw in some small animals. Every time it threw in food, it would lie down and watch. Later, these chicks became closer to the pterosaur and no longer followed the breeder. However, when the tribesmen saw that these birds didn't have any problems and were even more active, they didn't care. They even thought that it would be great if these birds could learn some commands from the pterosaur. After all, the feather tribesmen wouldn't teach them how to tame birds. They had to think of their own ways. Unfortunately, these birds weren't suitable for engraving. That was why the Yin Jiao people thought that it would be better to take it slow. When these birds grew up, they might be able to understand some commands. However, Xiaoxian felt that the pterosaur had other intentions. The reason why the pterosaur was so daring was because Xiaoxian didn't have the time to keep an eye on it. The man-made river channel at the Flaming River Trading Point was almost completed. The bridge that needed to be built was also built. Zheng Luo had been discussing with him about the sluice gates. They would build 2 sluice gates at the 2 crossings of the river channel and the Flaming River. The main purpose was to stop dangerous fish and river beasts from entering the river. The completion of the man-made river channel meant that the river wouldn't be blocked by the Flaming River Bridge anymore. Ships could use the man-made river channel to bypass the stone bridge. However, they had to pass under the watchful eyes of the Yinjiao people. They couldn't avoid Yinjiao's eyes. Chapter 716. Xiaoxian had been keeping an eye on the river to see if there were any changes that needed to be made, and if there were any additions that needed to be made, it would be much more difficult to make any changes once the river was cleared. As for the pterosaur's movements, as long as it didn't go up the mountain and attack Yinjiao's people, Xiaoxian wouldn't bother with it for the time being. After all, he was pressed for time. When no one was paying attention, the withered leaf birds started to lose their original temperament day by day and started to become strange. However, Xiaoxian didn't know about that. He only knew about the pterosaur's movements. As for the withered leaf birds, Xiaoxian thought that with the Yinjiao's people keeping an eye on them, nothing major would happen. Just 2 days before the river was completed, Xiaoxian was drawing some defensive tools that needed to be built when someone came to look for him. Xiaoxian thought that something had happened to the pterosaur, but unexpectedly, the person who came to look for him said, "There are strangers here." The chief said that if Great Elder is interested, you can go and take a look. Strangers? This meant that they were either from an unfamiliar tribe or from the other side of the sea. However, since Gigu sent someone to look for him, it definitely wasn't something ordinary. Xiaoxian temporarily put aside his matters here and walked towards the headquarters. When he crossed the stone bridge, he noticed that there was some Mu Fa tied to the side of the bridge. Xiaoxian had never seen the wood used to make Mu Fa here. There were also things that looked like sails on the rafts, but they weren't made of cloth. They were made of intertwined leaves. There were some ornaments on the Mu Fa. When he saw one of them, Xiaoxian's eyes narrowed. After taking a closer look, he more or less knew why Gigu was looking for him. The ornament on the Mu Fa was a small conch. The conch's growth pattern and color didn't seem to be from the river, but more like something from the sea. Were they from the sea? Looking at the spot where the Mu Fa stopped, Xiaoxian asked the person next to him, "Did they come from downstream?" "Yes. I heard from the people on the other side of the stone bridge that this is the case." The soldier looked around and whispered, "It seems that those people brought a lot of things, including shell coins." Shell coins? Due to the medicinal properties of seashells and their rarity, these seashells were also used as a form of currency in many places. If those people came from the desert, Xiaoxian would not be so surprised. Most of the inland shell coins came from there. The reason why the Rain tribe could have so many shell coins was because they worked as a middleman to get them from the desert. However, after the situation in the desert changed, coupled with the effects of a natural disaster, shell coins became less and less popular in the inland. There were expedition teams that came to the trading point that guessed that the tribes near the sea had either been exterminated or moved away. Anyway, they heard from others that when they went there, they didn't see anyone from the sea and no new shell coins came out from there. However, the sea was not only in one direction. Xiaoxian had said before that if they walked down the Flaming River, they would definitely see the sea. The last time he brought the fleet out, he wanted to see the sea before coming back. However, he didn't expect to have to come back early because of Caesar's eye. Now, they could actually see a tribe from the sea downstream. Xiaoxian didn't tell the others about his guess. If people from the sea were carrying shell coins, this information would arouse other expedition team suspicions. How many of them are here? Where are they now? Xiaoxian asked. I think there are about 50 of them. Their wooden rafts only stopped when they reached the stone bridge. Our people brought them ashore, but after they got ashore, more than half of them fainted and are now being brought up the mountain. Only 50 people? Most likely, the others had died in an accident on their way here. When Xiao Xian went up the mountain, he heard some people in the tribe talking. Every time they saw someone from a new tribe, there would always be a discussion. Everyone had different beliefs, different customs, different outfits. There were too many differences, and they were all topics of discussion. I heard that those people have horns on their heads. What horns? They're wearing horns. Are those really horns? Why haven't I seen horns like that before? They don't look like horns. Xiao Xian listened to the Yinjiao people's discussion and was confused. Horns? Gigu arranged for those people to stay in the reception area on the mountain. It was a big place with rooms and beds. The people of the Feather Tribe were arranged here before. When Xiao Xian went in, he found Gigu and Guizhe, as well as the two retired shamans. Gigu was talking to a person lying on the bed. That person looked very excited. He looked very tired, but he didn't fall down. He was dark and skinny, with many injuries on his body. His accent was heavy, probably because the sea was too far from the central area, and there were no other tribes there. His language began to have its own characteristics. Therefore, it was difficult for Gigu to communicate there, and he spoke slowly. There was something similar to a horn on the table next to him. It should be the horns that people in the tribe were talking about. However, it wasn't a beast horn, but a kind of snail from the sea. Seeing Xiao Xian come in, Gigu asked the wounded person to rest first. He walked out of the room and motioned for Xiao Xian to follow him. Those people took up 6 rooms, but there were many rooms here. Gigu took Xiao Xian to a room farther away. Which tribe are they from? Xiao Xian asked. Gigu's expression was complicated. He looked at Xiao Xian and said helplessly, I don't know. Seeing Xiao Xian's confusion, Gigu explained, I didn't hear what they said clearly. He could only guess what they were talking about. When those people were excited, they spoke faster, so Gigu couldn't understand what they were talking about. However, there should be people in their team who can speak better. It's just that most of them are in a coma now. The rest of them are just keeping their eyes open because they are alert. However, after Guizhe gave them the medicine, their attitude was obviously much better. Moreover, it seems that there is something they haven't said. Their emotions are more complicated. They're excited and happy, but they are also very alert. Of course, I know this should be a normal reaction. However, Xian, you don't know. The way they look at us is very strange. This is something that has never been shown by people from other tribes. Thinking of something, Gigu took out a shell. They brought a lot of things. There are beautiful stones and this extremely rare shell money. No, this is different from the shell money in the past. It hasn't been polished, and there is even rotten meat stuck on it. Xiao Xian looked at it carefully. He had learned from Yang Sui how to distinguish the valuable shell money. Some shells looked very beautiful and seemed to be very valuable, but in fact they had no medicinal value at all. They couldn't be used as shell money and couldn't be deceived by experts. However, some shells looked inconspicuous, but could be exchanged for more things from people who knew the value of shells. At this time, the shell that Gigu took out not only had a very beautiful pattern, which was in line with the preferences of some people who cared more about the color pattern, but also belonged to the kind of shell that had medicinal value. These things are enough to be shell money. The quality is even better than the shell money in the past. Xiao Xian said, That's true. But the strange thing is that those people don't seem to value these things very much. You know, if they need to trade materials, they will definitely protect these shells very well. However, those people didn't do that. What they value is a big shell. A big shell? Yes, I have asked people to move the big shell into a room. The people in the team who haven't fallen down are all guarding the big shell. I can feel that there is someone in the big shell. Chapter 717. They had traveled all the way from the lower reaches of the river to the Yinjiao tribe. They had paid a hefty price in order to reach the Yinjiao tribe. It seemed like their target was the Yinjiao tribe. Although Gui, he did not fully understand what those people were talking about. He was able to make some guesses and make some guesses. Those people didn't know who they were looking for. They just followed the flaming river upstream until they couldn't go any further. That was when they reached their destination. They couldn't continue because the stone bridge was blocking their way across the flaming river. Unless they carried the wooden raft over the bridge or brought it ashore and went around it, they would be stuck there forever. After all, the man-made river hadn't been opened yet, so they could only use this method at the moment. Those people obviously thought that they had reached their destination. I just don't know what their ultimate goal is. Gigu couldn't figure out. Although these people were on guard, they did not show any malice towards the flaming horns. According to the warriors who were guarding the stone bridge and brought them back, these people were cheering. It was obvious that they were very happy at the time. They were holding their breaths and finally relaxed. That was why so many of them fainted. They were very humble. When they first saw us, they even bowed respectfully. Gouet was also surprised at the time. After all, although the Flaming Horn tribe had made a name for themselves in this area, and some of the smaller tribes would flatter them, Gouet could see that these people's attitudes were different. If he really had to say, these people's eyes were sincere, and there was no flattery at all. Because they didn't show any greed or hostility, Gigu temporarily settled them down. Otherwise, if Gigu felt that something was wrong, he would have ordered his men to slaughter these people and feed them to the fishes in the flaming river. The reason should be in that big shell, Xiao Xian said. Yes, but we have to wait until those people wake up. Otherwise, they wouldn't open that big shell. There must be someone very important to them inside. Find out their purpose. Since they came from the seaside, we can learn about the situation along the way from them. We still don't know anything about the situation downstream, Xiao Xian said. Gigu smiled. Indeed, Yin Jiao could indeed use force to find out what was inside the big shell. They could even kill him and take the treasure, but there was no need for that. Yin Jiao really didn't care about those gems and shells. The Yin Jiao people had never shown much interest in gemstones and shells. In the beginning, Zhong Luo and the others who came from the other side of the sea might have been envious, but now they were used to it. They wouldn't be affected by the benefits in front of them. Otherwise, what would they do in the future? 2 days later, the people who were taken care of by Yin Jiao finally recovered. Those who were in a coma also woke up one after another in the past 2 days. Those who had been holding on saw that their companions had woken up and laid down next to them. No matter what time it was, there were at least 10 people guarding the big shell, not allowing anyone to get close. However, in the past 2 days, the leader of these people finally stood up. The first person was severely injured and unconscious for a day. When he woke up, he was in a hurry to find the chief and shamaness. Right now, that person was speaking in a hurry. He probably didn't know how to express himself. Sometimes, when he was anxious, his words became even more confusing. However, compared to the first person, this person's explanation wasn't very clear, but it was more or less understandable. His name was He Bien, the chief of the D Mountain tribe. Their tribe was in trouble, so he followed the shamanist instructions and led his people upstream. We just have to follow this river until we can't go any further. Then we'll reach our destination. This is what the shamanist told us. Is your tribe really the only one around here? He Bien asked. We're not the only tribe around here. However, the largest tribe around here is Yin Jiao, Gigu said. The stone bridge you saw was built by our tribe. Although it was built by the king's stoneworm, it was still their tribe's doing. This wasn't completely wrong. Gigu didn't feel pressured when he said this. Hearing this, He Bien was instantly filled with respect. Although he was unconscious for a day, he still remembered what he saw before he fainted. He saw all the houses on the mountain. It was completely different from their tribe, especially the stone bridge that spanned across the river. He couldn't imagine how such a sturdy stone bridge was built. Therefore, in his heart, the Flaming Horn tribe's status instantly rose by a few levels. Their image became more and more majestic. Most importantly, the stronger the Flaming Horn tribe was, the more excited he was. This meant that they might be able to find a way to save their tribe from the Flaming Horn tribe. Please save the D Mountain tribe. We can give you everything we have, even our lives. We only ask that you save our tribe. After saying this, He Bien bowed deeply to Gigu. Gigu was also confused. This was the first time a chief of a tribe had bowed so deeply to him. Also, he only heard the people of the D Mountain tribe say that they wanted Yinjiao to save them. How? He didn't even know the reason. He Bien said a lot, but he didn't understand a single word. He only knew that it wasn't because of foreign enemies. Gigu's face was expressionless. He looked at the people who kept saying, "Save our tribe," and bowed to him. He turned to Xiao Xian and said, "Come here." Xiao Xian looked at the man who was so emotional that he almost burst into tears. "Get up first, let's talk." He Bien raised his head and saw that Gigu had already moved to the side. The person closest to him was a young-looking person. He didn't understand what Yin Jiao was doing. "You are?" He Bien asked. "Yin Jiao's great elder, Xiao Xian." He Bien looked at Xiao Xian. He was still confused. "What's a great elder?" Ahem. A great elder is someone with the same status as the chief and shaman. In Yin Jiao, a great elder status is even more special, Gigu explained. He didn't expect this tribe to not know what an elder was. It was just like how Yin Jiao was isolated. However, the D Mountain tribe wasn't isolated. It was just that they didn't want to communicate with the outside world. He Bien reacted and was about to bow again when Xiao Xian quickly said, "Can you draw the D Mountain tribe's totem?" Drawing a totem could give one a basic understanding of tribe. The people of each tribe could draw other totems, but they definitely knew how to draw their own totems. Also, totems weren't a secret. It was something that could be made public. A big tribe like Yinjiao was more than happy to let more people know about their own totems. That was why He Bien wasn't dissatisfied with Xiao Xian's request. After Xiao Xian took out a brush, paint, and cloth, He Bien started drawing. He Bien wasn't used to using a brush and cloth, but he was very familiar with drawing totems. In just a few seconds, the D Mountain tribe's totem was drawn on the grayish-yellow linen cloth. Even though he wasn't used to drawing and the lines weren't even, it didn't stop Xiao Xian from seeing the totem clearly. When He Bien started drawing, Xiao Xian thought that He Bien was drawing a weird character with a pair of spectacles. However, very quickly, he added some patterns that looked like fish fins and scales around the character. There was even a fishtail on one side. It was obvious that the tribes near the river or the sea liked to use these totems. It was related to fish. He couldn't tell anything else for now. After he finished drawing the totem, He Bien looked at Xiao Xian eagerly, waiting for Xiao Xian to continue. "The person you brought here, the one in the shell, should be sealed by your shaman. Can we take a look?" Xiao Xian asked again. Xiao Xian had seen the shell before. He didn't get close to it, but he could feel the shaman's power on the shell. If a shaman sealed it personally, then it must be very important. This time, He Bien didn't nod immediately. Instead, he frowned and thought for a while. During that time, he looked at Xiao Xian several times. In the end, he gritted his teeth and agreed. The guards in the room where the shell was kept didn't stop them when they saw that it was He Bien who brought them in. However, their expressions were nervous, sad, and emotional. It was very strange. Xiao Xian's eyes quickly scanned the faces of the guards before he looked at the shell. He Bien took a deep breath and walked to the shell that was tightly shut. He gently knocked on the shell and said carefully, "Dian Dian, Dian Dian, are you awake?" In the next moment, dark blue patterns appeared on the shell where the shell was tightly shut. These patterns were very similar to the D Mountain tribe's totem that He Bien had drawn before. The only difference was that He Bien's drawing was more funny. On the other hand, the totem on the shell, where the character with a pair of spectacles was supposed to be, gave Xiao Xian an inexplicable chill and pressure. It wasn't directed at Xiao Xian. It was the aura of the totem itself. The D Mountain tribe wasn't as harmless as they looked. Chapter 718. After the totemic inscriptions appeared on the shell, the two tightly shut shells finally opened. A strange fishy smell came from inside. It smelled like rotten fish that had been thrown onto the shore by the pterosaur. However, since it was inside the shell, it was probably because it had been there for a long time. When Xiao Xian and Gigu looked inside, they realized that there was a person inside the shell besides some fish skin that didn't seem to have rotted. Although it was a person, it didn't look like a person anymore. From the size of the person, It looked like a child around 10 years old. However, the child's entire body was severely rotting. There wasn't a single piece of skin that was exposed outside of the child's clothes, so it was impossible to see what the child looked like. The rotten, fishy smell came from the child's body. However, even though the child's skin was rotting and they couldn't see her face, her eyes were still very beautiful. They didn't become gloomy because of her terrible condition. When she woke up, she was a little groggy. However, she quickly regained her senses and looked at Xiao Xian and the others with confusion in her eyes. He Bian lowered his voice, afraid that he would scare the child. Dian Dian, this is the Yinjiao tribe. This should be the place the shamaness mentioned. He Bian then introduced the child to Xiao Xian. She is one of the D Mountain tribe's children. She is sick, so the shamaness asked us to bring her here to seek help. Gigu finally understood what he Bian meant when he said, save our tribe. The D Mountain tribe probably didn't only have one child with this strange disease. They had only brought one child with them. If most of the children were sick and couldn't be treated, this tribe would have no future. It would be a blow to their entire tribe. No wonder he Bian was so agitated. If it were Gigu, he wouldn't have been able to remain calm either. His reaction might have been even more agitated than he Bian's. However, their tribe's treatment methods might be able to treat normal illnesses, but they might not be able to treat a strange disease like this. He had never seen such a strange disease before. Also, the cause of this disease might be related to the living conditions of the D Mountain people. How would the Yinjiao know about it? They couldn't help even if they wanted to. Gigu looked at Xiao Xian and waited for his decision. Anyway, as the leader, there was nothing he could do about it. He sent someone to the medicine house to call Gue Zhe over. Gue Zhe gasped when he saw the child in the shell, but he quickly suppressed the shock in his heart. She doesn't look too good. Not only was it not good, it was on the verge of death. He Bian and the others felt bitter, but there were some things they didn't want to say directly. Instead, they looked at the Yinjiao people expectantly, hoping that they had a solution. The shaman said that many tribes here liked shells. They didn't have anything else, but they had a lot of shells. Even if they didn't have any, they would risk their lives to get them back from the sea. If they wanted big or small shells, they would ask. If they needed those, they would try their best to find them, as long as they could find a cure. He Bian had already expressed that. He was now waiting for Yinjiao's response. For a moment, the room was abnormally quiet. The atmosphere was heavy. Dozens of pairs of eyes inside and outside the D Mountain tribe's house were all looking at Gue Zhe. After all, there was only one shaman here, and they were looking for the shaman. As for the chief and the grand elder, they had all forgotten about them. Just as Gue Zhe was about to say something, Xiao Xian said, how about this? You guys can rest here and see if you need any food. You'll only be energized when you're full. As for what you're talking about, it's not a simple matter. We need to discuss it. He Bian opened his mouth. He was anxious, but he knew that there was no point in being anxious. He could only suppress his anxiety. On the other side, Xiao Xian and the others arrived at the medicine house after they left the place. The people of the D Mountain tribe needed some medicine, so Gue Zhe ordered some people to send some over. They were all made from common herbs, so it wasn't a problem to bring a few more packets over. When only Xiao Xian, Gue Zhe, Gigu, and the two retired shamans were left in the room, Gue Zhe said, that child is very strange. She has 2 types of totemic power in her body. Gigu and the others couldn't tell, but as a shaman who is sensitive to totemic power in the fire seed's aura, Gue Zhe could see the crux of the matter. When he saw the child in the shell, Gue Zhe's reaction was huge. It wasn't just because of the child's illness. It was also because of this deeper discovery. Xiao Xian also noticed this, and it was because of this that he found it strange. 2 types of totemic power. This was the first time Gigu had heard of this. Totemic power came from totems. 2 types of totemic power meant that there were 2 totems. How could there be 2 totems in one tribe? Didn't that mean that the D Mountain tribe had 2 different fire seeds? But how could 2 different fire seeds coexist? How did that child's illness come about? Gigu felt like his understanding of the world had been refreshed once again. Nothing was too strange in this world. The reason why she became so scary was because the two types of totemic power in her body clashed with each other. Even if the child's totemic power wasn't awakened, it didn't mean that she didn't have any totemic power. As long as the totemic power exists, so does the conflict, Gui Zhe explained. There are ways to treat external injuries, internal injuries, poisoning, and so on. Even if there weren't any, they knew how to solve it. But how could they solve the problem of their fire seed and totemic power? It wasn't like they were from the Yinjiao tribe. There's one thing you might not have noticed, Xiaoxian said. What is it? Guizhe was puzzled. It's not just that child. All the other D-Mountain tribesmen have the same problem. It's just that their symptoms aren't as severe. What? How is that possible? It wasn't just Guizhe and Gigu. The two elders who had been silent all this time also exclaimed in shock. Xian, are you saying that the entire D-Mountain tribe might have the same problem? The old man asked. Xiaoxian nodded. That's very likely. No wonder. I thought that only a portion of the children had the same problem. I didn't expect it to affect the entire D-Mountain tribe. Then does the D-Mountain tribe really believe in two totems? There are two types of fire seeds burning in the tribe? The old woman shook her head. That shouldn't be the case. Otherwise, the D-Mountain tribe would have been wiped out a long time ago. Is it because they want to merge their fire seed with another tribe's fire seed? Gigu guessed. This guess wasn't baseless. A long time ago, after winning a battle, some tribes tried to merge their fire seed with the other tribe's fire seed. However, they all failed. That was why they didn't think about merging their fire seed with the other tribe's fire seed anymore. That was why they didn't think about it anymore and just destroy the other tribe's fire seed. This was mentioned in the notes left by the Yinjiao ancestors. They even warned the descendants of the Yinjiao tribe not to mess around. Otherwise, they would be in big trouble. Instead of guessing, why don't we ask them directly? If they want help, they won't hide it from us, Xiaoxian said. That's true. If they still don't want to tell us the truth, we shouldn't meddle in their business, Gigu agreed. After making the decision, Xiaoxian went to talk to Hebian, while Guizhe went to look for the child in the shell. When Xiaoxian asked someone to bring Hebian to a room to talk to him alone, Hebian seemed very anxious and uneasy. However, he was holding it in. When he saw Xiaoxian, Hebian hurriedly asked, Great Elder, is there a solution? He only remembered that this person was the Great Elder. As for his name, he didn't pay attention and forgot about it after hearing it. Xiaoxian handed him a cup of herbal tea. Not at the moment. That's why I want to know more about it. There are some questions that need to be answered. Ask away. Hebian didn't hold back and took a big gulp of the warm tea in the clay cup. He waited for Xiaoxian to speak. The tea had a light bitter taste and was refreshing. It relieved his body of tiredness. His initial irritation also lessened, and he spoke more clearly. Does your tribe only have one totem? Of course there's only one. Hebian felt that Xiaoxian's question was stupid. Of course there was only one totem. How could there be two? You only have one fire seed? Xiaoxian asked again. Of course. Hebian was even more confused now. Was there something wrong with the Yinjiao people's brains? How could they ask such a stupid question? You've never thought of merging with another fire seed? Xiaoxian pretended not to see Hebian's gaze. Why would we do such a stupid thing? Hebian almost smashed his cup. The D-Mountain tribe didn't like to communicate with other tribes, but they still knew the basics. Xiaoxian thought to himself, the other D-Mountain tribesmen probably don't know the deeper problem behind this, but that doesn't mean no one knows. They just didn't tell Hebian. They didn't even tell the chief. It seemed like the chief didn't have a high status in the D-Mountain tribe. Hebian originally thought that if this Yinjiao Great Elder asked such a stupid question again, he wouldn't be able to hold back his anger. Luckily, the next question he heard was normal. Tell me about the D-Mountain tribe's traditions, Xiaoxian said. Traditions? Was this related to curing illnesses? Hebian looked at Xiaoxian suspiciously, but he still held onto some hope, so he patiently told him. The D-Mountain tribe is different from other tribes in many ways. The most unique thing is probably the D-fish, Hebian said. D-fish? That's right. There's a mountain near the sea called D-Mountain. There are fish on D-Mountain called D-fish. Our tribe has lived on D Mountain for generations, and we've lived with the D fish for generations. The ancestors of the D Mountain tribe were able to safely reach the foot of D Mountain with the help of the D fish and built the D Mountain tribe. The D fish is one of the D Mountain tribe's totems. Xiao Xian remembered the D Mountain tribe's totems. The human face and fish pattern on the totem should be the D fish that Bien was talking about. However, he couldn't tell what the D fish looked like just by looking at the totem. The D fish is an important part of the D Mountain tribe. The D fish will also participate in the ceremony. Also, if someone in our tribe dies, according to the D Mountain tribe's rules, they won't be cremated in the fire pit. They will be buried as fish. The fish burial that Bien was talking about didn't mean that they would bury the fish directly. Instead, they would throw the deceased into the water and bury them in the fish's stomach. The D fish that lived under D Mountain were the ones who carried out the fish burial. The D fish, that was hell. If what Bien said was true, then the D Mountain tribe was similar to the drumming tribe. The drumming tribe's crocodiles were part of the drumming tribe and had lived together for generations. The only difference between the two was the fish burial. The drumming tribe knew how to bury fish, but they didn't have a fish burial. Chapter 719. Xiao Xian listened to Bien talk about a lot of things, mainly about the customs of the D Mountain tribe. Bien was still very cautious when it came to the secrets of the tribe. However, Xiao Xian already had a basic understanding of the tribe. All in all, the D Mountain tribe was a tribe that would rather live with fish than interact with humans. Their main source of food was the wild fruits in the forest and the fish in the sea. Compared to the land and rivers, they preferred the boundless blue ocean. Their understanding of the fish and sea beasts in the sea was much greater than that of the land. They didn't use nets often and rarely made complicated stone tools. They preferred harpoons made from hornstones or the bones and shells of other sea creatures as weapons. Hornstones were the horns that Xiao Xian saw the D Mountain tribesmen wearing. They were actually a type of animal that lived in the sea. Its shape and material were very suitable for making weapons, so the D Mountain tribesmen would often look for hornstones when they were catching fish in the sea. Some hornstones were much bigger than a human's body length. What was special about the D Mountain tribe was that they were good at diving. Perhaps it was because they lived by the sea and their physique, but they were good at swimming and diving. They could dive deeper than other tribes. Even the Ji tribe couldn't compare to them. The sea was the D Mountain tribesmen's main hunting ground. When Xiao Xian heard Bien talk about how they hunted in the sea, he felt that the D Mountain tribe was indeed more suited to the sea. As for the D fish that Xiao Xian was interested in, Bien tried to draw it. However, compared to the totem, the fish he drew didn't look like a fish at all. Xiao Xian temporarily gave up on trying to understand what the D fish looked like from Bien. However, when Bien mentioned the D fish, he had a complicated expression on his face. He wouldn't tell Xiao Xian exactly why. After Bien left, Xiao Xian chatted with a few of the injured members of the D Mountain tribe. He casually mentioned the D fish, but these people were different from Bien. Their feelings towards the D fish weren't as complicated as Bien's. They completely treated the D fish as their true companions. This was an idea passed down from their ancestors. They had been taught this since they were young. However, there must be another secret behind this, and it must be related to the D fish. On the other side, Gui Zhe finished talking to the child in the shell. Because the child said that his condition would be better in the water, Gui Zhe asked someone to prepare a large stone vat. Ever since pottery became popular in the tribe, stone tools were gradually used less and less. Gui Zhe asked someone to find an empty stone vat and fill it with river water. Then he asked Bien and the others to put the child in. Seawater is still different from river water, but having water is good. It's better than being in a shell all the time, Xiao Xian said. Although the child in the shell did not show it, it could be seen that she was in pain. It was impossible for her body to fester without her noticing. Bien and the others said that when they were still in the D Mountain tribe, they would dig a big hole and let the sick children stay in it. They would get fresh seawater every day. During this long journey, The shaman thought of putting Dian in a shell. Before they set off, the shell was filled with seawater, but on the way, the seawater gradually disappeared. With the D Mountain tribesmen taking care of Dian, they did not have to worry too much about Yinjiao. Although the D Mountain tribesmen were anxious, they were still well-behaved. "How did it go on your side?" Xiao Xian asked Gui Zhe. He briefly told him what he found out from He, but he felt that Gui Zhe would definitely be able to get more information from the child. That child, Gui Zhe, seemed to have encountered a difficult problem. She is the next shaman of the D Mountain tribe. If she survives. The child did not hide this from Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian realized that there were many things that He did not know. Perhaps He had noticed it, but he did not know more about it. This was a team that came all the way here to find a cure. It was impossible for everyone to be clueless. That was why there was at least one person in this team who knew the truth. If He, who was the leader of this team, was not that person, then who else had a higher status than He? Now he knew. No wonder He and the others value that child so much. After all, they were raising her as the next shaman. This was something that Gui Zhe deeply understood. That child knows her own condition very well. She didn't hide anything from me and told me everything. Just as we guessed, the cause of her illness is the conflict between the two totemic powers in her body, Gui Zhe said. What is her attitude towards the D fish? Xiao Xian suddenly asked. That's the strange thing. Xian, tell me, He attitude towards the D fish is very complicated. The other D tribesmen seem to be very close to the D fish, but when the child talks about the D fish, her gaze is guarded. Gui Zhe did not understand this. Because she was familiar with the drumming tribe, she initially thought that the D Mountain tribe was similar to the drumming tribe. The drumming tribesmen also saw crocodiles as their companions. However, none of the drumming tribesmen treated crocodiles differently. She still has many things that she hasn't told us, Xiao Xian said. When we were talking to her, she asked everyone to leave. It seems like there are some things that she doesn't want others to know, including He. Xiao Xian thought for a moment. She's observing and probing. If we don't have a solution, or if we don't want to interfere, she won't say anything else. Gui Zhe nodded. She asked if we could extract one of the totemic powers from her body. I can't think of a solution for this at the moment. After all, I've never seen anyone with two types of totemic powers. Extract one. Xiao Xian also didn't know how to extract one of the two types of powers from his body. His situation was special too. Other than Yin Jiao's fire seed and totemic power, there was another type of power in his body. However, unlike the D Mountain tribesmen, the two types of powers in his body did not conflict with each other. In fact, most of the time, Yin Jiao's fire seed and totemic power would become more active under the influence of the other type of power. Next time, when you go look for that child, I'll go too. I have some questions for her. Xiao Xian could tell that the child was closer to Gui Zhe, probably because she was the successor to shaman. Other than Gui Zhe, she didn't want to talk to anyone else. Xiao Xian wanted to ask Gui Zhe to pass the message, but after thinking about it, he decided that it would be better for him to ask her personally. They could totally ignore the D Mountain tribesman situation, but Xiao Xian was very curious about the cause of the D Mountain tribesmen. Besides Xiao Xian, Gui Zhe and the two retired shamans also had the same thought. They also wanted to know the cause and the solution. Anything related to the fire seed always piqued the shaman's interest. On this day, Xiao Xian went to the place where the D Mountain tribesmen were settled down. The D Mountain tribesmen treated Gui Zhe much better than Xiao Xian. This was because the shaman was the absolute leader in the D Mountain tribe. The chief was only secondary. It wasn't rare to see a tribe like this, so Xiao Xian wasn't surprised. When he walked over, he heard laughter coming from inside. The stone that was placed in the middle of the room, and the large shell was still in its original position. It was open, but there was no longer any water inside. Perhaps it was because the child was soaking in the water, so the smell in the room wasn't as strong as it was on the first day. Just like the first day, the child was wearing clothes made from the skin of a type of sea fish. There were a few fish in a large stone tank that the D Mountain tribesmen had caught in the flaming river themselves. They said it was for the child to play with. What was the most abundant fish in the flaming river? Piranhas. Yes, the toys the D-Mountain tribesmen had caught for the child were the famous piranhas in the flaming river. They were the kind that were very active before their teeth were pulled out. The 3 fish in the vat weren't big. They were about the size of an adult's palm. After all, there was a limit to how big they could fit in the vat. If it were anyone else, they would definitely be attacked by the 3 piranhas in the vat. No matter how big or small they were born to be vicious. But now, the 3 piranhas that were so arrogant in the flaming river were like little chicks being chased. They dodged the human's palm, even if the human's palm was much smaller than theirs. The laughter Xiao Xian heard came from the child in the water as she slapped the piranhas in the vat. It seemed like she was very satisfied with this toy. If the Ji tribesmen didn't have the crocodiles to protect them, they might not even be able to do this. However, this child in front of him did it. Xiao Xian wondered if it was because of the child's illness that the piranhas were avoiding her. Or was it because all the D-Mountain tribesmen could do this? When she saw Xiao Xian and Gue Zhe walk in, the child called Dian Dian stopped slapping the fish. The water in the stone vat calmed down, but the 3 piranhas were still trying their best to stay away. They were practically sticking to the walls of the stone vat. If there was a gap in the wall, they would probably jump out through it. Chapter 720. Seeing Gue Zhe walk in, the child in the stone tank grinned at Gue Zhe. However, because her face was also festering, she looked even scarier than the drumming tribesmen when they smiled. Only her eyes were still bright, like the reflection of Yangguang on the surface of the sea. As for Xiao Xian, he was like a backdrop. The child called Dian Dian only glanced at him casually and didn't look at him anymore. She looked at him the same way she looked at everyone else. How do you feel today? Gue Zhe went over to take a closer look at Dian Dian in the stone tank. I'm much better. Her young voice didn't change because of her illness. If you only heard her voice, you wouldn't think that her illness was so serious. He Bien and the others looked at Gue Zhe nervously. When the child lowered her head to look at the fish in the stone tank, Gue Zhe shook his head at them. He Bien and the others' expectant gazes immediately dimmed. They were filled with disappointment and sorrow. The shamanist told them to come here to find a solution. But if they couldn't find a cure even here, where could they go to find an answer? Or was the place the shamanist was talking about not here, but somewhere else upstream? They heard that Yinjiao Stone Bridge was built after they moved here. It didn't originally exist on the Flaming River. If it wasn't for this stone bridge, they wouldn't have been stopped, and this wouldn't be the end. The D tribesmen who came here had a private discussion about whether they should stay or leave. They still couldn't come to a conclusion. Some said that this was definitely not the place the shamanist was talking about. They shouldn't waste time here and should continue upstream. However, the other half thought this was the place. After all, the Yinjiao people said there would be fewer tribes upstream. Plus, Yinjiao was the strongest tribe in this area. He Bien was frustrated. He couldn't decide. After all, no matter what they chose, if they made the wrong choice, they wouldn't have the chance to regret it. They might even be wiped out by the D tribe. Maybe he should ask Dian Dian. He Bien looked over at the stone vat. Dian Dian was still playing with the 3 fishes in the stone vat. From time to time, it would answer Gue Zhe's questions. Although Dian Dian said that she was much better, it was only compared to the torment she felt when she was in the shell during the long journey. Soaking in the stone vat and being able to move freely was of course much better than being in the shell. However, if one were to look at her body, they would find that her festering condition had worsened compared to when she had just come out of the shell. Xiao Xian squatted down so that he was at eye level with the person inside. I have a few questions to ask. After he finished speaking, Xiao Xian looked at He Bien and the others at the door. Dozens of pairs of eyes stared at Xiao Xian cautiously. They could allow the shaman Gue Zhe to talk to Dian Dian alone, but they couldn't allow anyone else to do so. Moreover, Xiao Xian was a man. Who knew what would happen if they left him here? Xiao Xian wasn't in a hurry. He waited for the person in the stone vat to make a decision. He knew that this child actually knew everything. In the stone vat, Dian Diane's movements slowed down. She lowered her head and seemed to be thinking seriously. After a while, she raised her head and looked at He Bien and the others. He Bien, stay here. The rest of you leave. The D Mountain people didn't seem to think that there was anything wrong with calling He Bien by his name. She didn't have the respect that other tribesmen had for their chief. It wasn't hard to imagine how important this child was to the D Mountain people. Even if she was only going to be the next shaman, and even if her condition was serious, it didn't affect her status. He Bien wanted to persuade her again, but he knew that once the person in the stone vat made a decision, it would be hard to change her mind. He could only wave his hand and signal for the others to leave and not eavesdrop. When there were only 4 people left in the room, He Bien closed the doors and windows. When Yin Jiao built houses, they used wood that was more soundproof. For this reason, they compared many different types of wood and finally settled on this one. It was also a type of wood that grew in the mountains and forests of Yin Jiao. The noise outside faded away, and the room quieted down. Dian Dian, you have 2 totemic powers in your body. That's why you're sick. This also means that the D Mountain tribe has 2 fire seeds. In the quiet room, Xiao Xian's calm voice was like a bolt of lightning. He Bien froze on the spot. When he regained his senses, He Bien couldn't help but refute. How can there be 2 fire seeds? You're lying. Previously, when Xiao Xian asked him this question, He Bien thought it was ridiculous. He didn't have any common sense and was just spouting nonsense. But now, after He Bien shouted, he realized that Dian Dian was still silent. She didn't refute him. He looked back and forth between the person in the stone vat and Xiao Xian and Gui Zhe. He Bien's jaw dropped. He couldn't hide the shock on his face. When he saw that the person in the stone vat didn't say anything, Xiao Xian continued. The other fire seed is the D fish, right? On the other side, He Bien, who was already standing there in shock, jumped up when he heard this news. However, he didn't shout this time. Instead, he looked at the person in the stone vat. The person in the stone vat finally raised her head and looked at Xiao Xian. Her eyes were filled with shock. She didn't expect Xiao Xian to know about this. She was silent, but she didn't refute him. It's true. He Bien's lips trembled. His tanned face turned gray. Although he knew some things that others didn't, and his feelings towards the D fish were complicated, he didn't expect it to be like this. The D fish had a fire seed. Why didn't they notice it before? Where was the fire seed? This was unbelievable. It was completely beyond their knowledge. Xiao Xian had told Gui Zhe about this before they came. Gui Zhe was also shocked for a long time. Now that he saw Dian Dian's reaction, Xiao Xian's guess was proven to be true. Dian Dian looked at the water in the stone vat again and reached out to the fish. A long, long time ago, the ancestors of the D Mountain came to D Mountain with the help of the D fish and established the D Mountain tribe. At the same time, they treated the D fish as a gift from the gods. The descendants of the D Mountain tribe also treated the D fish with respect. If any of the D Mountain tribesmen died, the ancestors would pass their bodies to the D fish. The ancestors said that the D fish would bring the tribesmen to a better place. Yes, this was a story passed down from generation to generation. He Bien had been brainwashed by this story since he was young. They never doubted anything because the D fish would indeed help them. When they ran out of food, the D fish would bring fish back from the sea and throw them ashore. If the D Mountain tribesmen were in danger in the sea, the D fish would also help. The D Mountain tribesmen would also help the D fish. When the D fish was in trouble, the D Mountain tribesmen would do their best to help them. This seemed to be a mutually beneficial relationship. However, after He Bien took over the position of chief, he saw different ideas in the notes of the previous chiefs. Most of the notes were from the last few hundred years. They all had different ideas, but they could be summed up in one sentence. They had to be wary of the D fish. Otherwise, the D Mountain tribe would be wiped out. Actually, a similar illness had appeared in the tribe a long time ago. Perhaps it was at that time that the D Mountain tribe's ancestors felt that something was wrong. However, the only person who knew the key to this was the shamaness. He Bien didn't know why the shamaness kept this from him. Maybe she was suspicious and felt that this idea was disrespectful. Or maybe there were other reasons. After all, The chief wasn't the shamaness. In the D Mountain tribe, a chief like He Bien didn't know much. He didn't know the truth. Now, more and more people were falling sick, but most of the D Mountain tribesmen didn't link this illness to the D fish. But now, what was this Yin Jiao head elder saying? The D fish was the cause of this strange illness in their tribe. The person in the stone tank didn't look at the reactions of the other 3 people in the room. She continued to play with the 3 fish in the water. 700 years ago, the first person in the D Mountain tribe fell sick. He couldn't be cured, so he jumped into the sea where the D fish lived. However, the D fish pushed him ashore. According to the ancestral notes, the D fish surrounded that person. After they pushed him ashore, they didn't leave for a long time. It wasn't until that person passed away that the D fish took him and sank into the sea. He Bien's eyelids twitched. He had heard these stories before. Every time his elders and the people around him talked about this story, they would express their gratitude and say that the D fish really protected them. Even when they were sick and couldn't see the person's face, they still wouldn't bring them into the sea. The D fish really treated the D Mountain tribesmen well. But now, when he heard Dien Dien talk about it, he felt a chill down his spine. He Bien felt a chill down his spine. The bad feeling was getting stronger and stronger. After that, the same illness would appear in the tribe every few decades. The children who had just awakened their totemic powers couldn't be cured and died soon after. The longest they could live was 2 years. Later on, the illness appeared more frequently and more people fell sick. This time it reached its peak. The shamaness said that the D fish had started to act. Their fire seed was strong enough. Why didn't they kill them when they knew the cause? Kill them. He Bien was agitated. The muscles on his face were trembling. His eyes were filled with hatred and madness. His expression was ferocious. It's too late. It's hard to separate the 2 fire seeds now. If we act rashly, the D fish might attack us. After all, the D fish can come ashore. Also, if we fight them directly, the D Mountain fire seed will be severely damaged. Before we came out this time, the shamaness said that we don't have enough time. Either we win or we die. But before we reach the end, the shamaness hopes that there will be another solution. The person in the stone tank lowered her head and stared at the fish inside. He Bien thought of the ancestors of the D Mountain. They had been listening to their ancestors since they were young and had been instilled with their thoughts. Even if they were shamans, not every generation had the same thoughts. Even if they noticed the abnormality, they would hesitate and hesitate for a long time. By the time they finally made a decision, it was already too late. For almost 100 years, the shamaness of the D Mountain had been looking for a solution, but it was to no avail. This time, the shamaness said that she finally found a solution. She said that she had to follow the river that connected the tribe to the sea until she couldn't go any further. Dien Dien looked at He Bien. Do you know how the D Mountain's totem came about? He Bien looked like he was about to break down. He shook his head. Dien Dien looked at Xiao Xian and He Bien. Can I borrow a brush? Xiao Xian took out the brush and a blank piece of cloth that he always carried with him. The brush holder was already filled with paint. This was Xiao Xian's homemade brush, so he could directly write after pulling out the cap. Dien Dien looked at the brush in her hand. Then, she leaned against the side of the stone tank and let He Bien hold the cloth. When the D Mountain was first built, their totem looked like this. Dien Dien drew a strange human face on He Bien's left palm. However, it was different from the face that Xiao Xian saw. It looked like a pair of glasses. As Dien Dien continued to draw, Xiao Xian noticed more differences. The fins and tails around the human face were much smaller than the rest of the human face. After she finished drawing, Dien Dien continued drawing on He Bien's right palm. Now, the D Mountain's totem looks like this. The second drawing was similar to He Bien's. It was also what Xiao Xian saw on the big shell. The human face was smaller. There were more lines on the face. It looked even weirder. The fins and tails were bigger. Also, there were a few more strokes on the other side of the human face. If they didn't see the first drawing, it would be hard to notice the difference in the second drawing. Every generation of D Mountain people only recognized the totem during the ceremony. Most of the time, they saw it in the fire pit. They thought that it was what they needed to remember. If they remembered it wrongly, they would correct it. Dian Dian didn't stop there. She pulled the cloth and continued to draw after the second drawing. If this continues, the future totem will look like this. As she drew the third drawing, Bian's hands trembled even more. On the third totem painting, the proportion of a human face was not much different from the second totem. However, on the other side of the human face, Xiao Xian felt that there were a few extra strokes, and now it was all filled up. It was a fish mouth. On one side of the human face was a fish tail. On the other side was a fish mouth. It looked like it was swallowing the human face. The D Mountain tribe's totem has changed from the combined totem to the swallow totem. Bian's expression turned even uglier. Beads of sweat rolled down his forehead. His voice trembled as he said, "They are swallowing the D Mountain's fire seed." Chapter 721. Could a fearsome beast have a fire seed? Yes. The existence of the king stoneworm and the bat leader told Xiao Xian that fearsome beasts could have a fire seed too. He even told the Yin Jiao people about this. That was why Gue Zhe and the others weren't as shocked as the D people. However, this was the first time they heard of a fearsome beast devouring a human tribe's fire seed. Even though Gigu and the others weren't interested in this matter at first, they still wanted to find out more. How would the D people deal with this situation? How would they fight back? Would they fight them head-on or use other tactics? Bian's mind was in a mess. He was already on his guard against the D fish, but the beliefs of the D people that had been passed down for thousands of years were crumbling. It wasn't easy to accept this. No matter how strong Bian was, he couldn't remain calm at this moment. Beliefs and inheritances, especially things passed down by their ancestors, were rarely doubted or questioned by tribesmen, let alone overturn them. This was also why the D Mountain tribesmen didn't say anything even though they realized something was wrong. In the world of the tribesmen, it was too difficult to make a decision like this. It wasn't easy to make the Yin Jiao people doubt their ancestors. Xiao Xian once joked that if Yin Jiao's ancestors said there was only one moon in the sky, the Yin Jiao people would believe them too. Seeing is believing? Most of the time, seeing was believing, but it was not necessarily more effective than believing in their ancestors. This was the tribesmen. Even if something was right, it still needed time to be accepted. It was during this process that the D Mountain people encountered all kinds of difficulties and ended up in their current state. How can there be two rulers in one place at the same time? The child in the stone vat said with a hint of sarcasm. In the beginning, the ancestors of D Mountain probably wanted to coexist with the D fish. However, time had proven that they were too naive. Even if they were just fish, they were fish that possessed the power of the fire seed. Fearsome beasts weren't necessarily stupid. They could even be more cunning, smarter, more ambitious, and more far-sighted than humans. Now, they were constantly eating away at D Mountain's fire seed. The cost of fusing two different types of fire seeds was too great. Time and the lives of generations of tribesmen were not something that most tribes were willing to pay. If they had the energy, they would rather expand their territory and snatch resources. However, those fishes did it. As they gradually devoured the power that did not belong to them, they fused it for their own use. Then what should we do? Bian's lips trembled. He didn't know if it was out of fear or hatred. He hated that the D fish would do something like this. He was afraid that their tribe would disappear from this world. In the tribesmen's minds, if their fire seed was taken away, they would be gone. Dian, what should we do? If we can't find a solution here, should we continue marching up the flaming river? Bian asked anxiously. There's no need to go upstream. Dian continued to play with the piranhas in the stone tank. Her voice was calm. If we can't find a solution here in Yinjiao, then we'll go back. Go back. What about you? You? Bian stared at the person in the stone tank. He couldn't finish his sentence. The person in the stone tank looked up at Bian. There wasn't much emotion in her eyes. She looked cold and determined. Go back. I'll carve something on the shell. Bring it back and tell the tribesmen that the D people and the D fish will fight or die. Even the shamaness couldn't convince everyone in the D tribe. But what if she added fuel to the fire? Dien Dien Yu and the shamaness. Bien stared blankly at the person in the stone tank. He wasn't stupid. Compared to the others, he was much smarter. Bien wasn't outstanding in the D tribe. He was even naughty and mischievous when he was young. However, the shamaness chose him to be the chief because he wasn't dumb. He knew how to think on his own and had his own standards. He might not be able to do what the shamaness wanted him to do, but compared to the others, he was the best choice. Perhaps the shamaness had already expected this day to come when she chose the chief. The shamaness said that we'll find a solution if we follow the flaming river upstream. Is this true? Bien's voice trembled even more. Dien Dien, who was in the stone vat, revealed a rare look of surprise. Then she revealed a smile. The smile could no longer be seen on her face because of the festering, but the smile in her eyes was obvious. Dien Dien thought to herself that the shamaness had chosen the right person. It was already rare for her to think this far. Seeing Dien Dian's reaction, Bien's entire body started to tremble. If there really wasn't a solution, the shamaness did say that there was a solution. It's true, but we're not sure. That's why we have another choice. The first half of Dien Dian's words made Bien sigh in relief, but the second half was like a death sentence. Bien had already guessed what the other choice was. Dien Dien probably didn't want to come back alive this time. That was why she was so calm. This was related to the survival of the tribe. They couldn't place all their hopes on one path. If they couldn't find a way out of this, they had to prepare another path. The other path was also their last chance. They could only fight. However, if they really fought, the D fish wouldn't hold back. They grew up eating D people. Even if they only ate dead people, they were still D people. What should the D mountain tribe do when faced with the ferocious D fish? Their fire seed was already trapped there by the D fish's fire seed. They couldn't move. If they really fought, how could the D mountain tribe win if they still had their hands tied? Most of the time, changing one's mind required time and blood. The latter could cause a greater impact in a short period of time, especially when it was something deeply ingrained in the tribesmen's minds. If they didn't pay the price, they would never be able to wake them up. The people who brought Dien Dien out were all chosen by the shamaness. They were trustworthy. If there wasn't a solution, then Dien Dien wouldn't be able to hold on for much longer. When they returned, she would only be a corpse. Bien and the others would bring Dien Dian's corpse back. They would also bring Dien Dian's words on the shell to the tribesmen. That was the solution. Perhaps this would shake the stubborn tribesmen's minds. They wouldn't be a burden to their comrades in battle. Dien Dian's status in the D Mountain tribe was very high. Perhaps she was second only to the shamaness. Because of this, her words would definitely change some people's minds. This was a typical shamaness. She always liked to solve problems through thoughts, knowledge, and beliefs. Bien was already choking on his sobs. He didn't know what to say, but when he was agitated, his accent came out. Xiao Xian couldn't understand what he meant. The atmosphere in the room was heavy. Cough. Xiao Xian broke the heavy silence. I don't know how to extract the other totemic power. These two powers are already very tightly entangled. You can feel it yourself. It's extremely difficult to do. If you try to force it, it might even endanger your life. However, have you tried swallowing the D fish's fire seed instead? Chapter 722. As soon as Xiao Xian said this, Bien, who had been mumbling to himself, looked at him as if he was an idiot. Of course, they had thought about devouring the D Mountain tribe's fire seed. However, how many years had passed since the D Mountain tribe's fire seed was devoured? How many generations had it been since the D Mountain tribe's fire seed was devoured? Did they even have the time? I'm not saying what you think. Xiao Xian explained, of course, I know that devouring and merging with the D Mountain tribe's fire seed takes a long time. However, what I'm trying to say is that you can take the fire seed that belongs to you into your own body first. Then, you can slowly fight with the D Mountain tribe's fire seed. Take it into our own body. Bien didn't understand what Xiao Xian meant. Even Dien Dien, who was playing with her fish, looked at Xiao Xian curiously. Guizhe understood what Xiao Xian meant when he heard Xiao Xian's words. That's right. Although this method isn't completely safe, it's much better than what you just said. According to what you said, there are actually two types of fire seeds in the D Mountain Tribe's fire pond. It's just that the two types of fire seeds are mixed together. Many of you can't tell the difference. After all, the D Mountain Tribe's fire seed was able to grow to its current size because it devoured the D Mountain Tribe's fire seed. Therefore, it's understandable that you can't tell the difference. However, even if it's hard to tell, there are still two different types of fire seeds. You can use the parts that haven't been devoured to stop the D Mountain Tribe from devouring them. Xiao Xian saw that he, Bian, and Dian Dian were listening to him, so he continued. The two types of fire seeds are mixed together in the fire pond. If you want to move them, it's not up to you to decide. Unless both sides agree, the D Mountain Tribe will definitely not agree. This means that you won't be able to move your fire seed in the short term. Instead of fighting right now, why don't you merge the fire seed that still belongs to the D Mountain Tribe into your own body? That way, the D Mountain Tribe won't be able to snatch it away from you. Also, a totemic warrior who has merged with a fire seed will still be stronger than a totemic warrior who hasn't merged with a fire seed. Fire seed fuse into our bodies? To He Bian and Dian Dian, this kind of saying was rather novel, and they didn't even think about it. Actually, you should be able to sense that Yin Jiao doesn't have a primitive fire seed, Xiao Xian said. He Bian only realized now because he was worried about his tribe and Dian Dian, so he didn't pay much attention to it. The D tribesmen didn't interact with the outside world on a daily basis. Even when they traveled up the Flaming River, they tried their best to avoid other people. They had forgotten what it felt like to be rejected by fire seeds from different tribes. Even though Dian Dian was being trained as the next shaman, her experience was limited. She had never experienced the intense rejection of the fire seed. What she knew was limited to the theoretical knowledge taught by the shaman. Now that Xiao Xian mentioned it, she remembered that there was indeed such a thing. Primordial fire seed? Dian Dian caught hold of this term for the first time. Yes. For example, the fire seed that you D-Mountain people put in your fire pond is a primitive fire seed. However, the fire pond in Yinjiao doesn't have a primitive fire seed. How is that possible? He Bian's worldview was refreshed once again. It had only been a short while today, but he had already been rejected multiple times. Nothing is impossible. Blood and fire come from the same source. Now, many tribes on this mainland have merged with a primitive fire seed. The big tribes have already done so, and the small and medium tribes are following closely behind. The D-Mountain people don't interact with the outside world and live far away, so you don't know about this. This isn't news anymore. If you don't believe me, you can go to the Flaming River trading point and ask around. On the other side of the stone bridge, there's a large trading point built by Yin Jiao. He Bian's jaw dropped. He didn't know how to react. However, he knew that the Yin Jiao head elder's words were probably true. The D-Mountain people didn't like to interact with other tribes and lived in a remote area. If the other tribes didn't know about the merging of fire seeds, the D-Mountain people definitely wouldn't know. Dian Dian, who was in the stone vat, showed a rare look of excitement. Can it really be merged? If they couldn't separate the fire seeds that were mixed together, then what about directly merging the parts that belonged to them? Now that they thought about it, it wasn't impossible. Perhaps the solution the shamanist mentioned really existed? Thinking up to this point, Dian Dian tried to climb out of the stone vat, but He Bian pressed her down. It was better for him to ask for help. Hence, before Xiao Xian could speak, He Bian fell to his knees. Head Elder, please save our D-Mountain. Before this, He Bian had already told Gigu that as long as they could help the D-Mountain people, they would do their best to help. Even if it was a rare treasure at the bottom of the sea, they would do their best to find it. Get up first. I'm not done talking, Xiao Xian said helplessly. Oh. He Bian got up and leaned against the stone vat. He looked straight at Xiao Xian and waited for Xiao Xian to continue. When Xiao Xian was done, he would continue begging. As long as he could get Yin Jiao to help, begging didn't matter. So what if he lost face? It didn't matter. What I want to add is that the D-Mountain people's situation is special. We can't predict what will happen during the merging process. Even without your complicated situation, the merging process is still very risky. Xiao Xian told him about the tribes that had failed to merge their fire seeds. Bian hesitated when he heard about the risks, but Dian, who was in the stone vat, was very excited. Her eyes were shining brightly. Use this. Use this method. I believe this is the best solution. Bian opened his mouth, but he remained silent. He couldn't change Dian's mind. Can you teach us how to merge our fire seeds? Dian asked expectantly. I can only tell you the things you need to pay attention to when merging a primitive fire seed under normal circumstances. You'll have to figure out the rest based on the D Mountain people's situation, Xiao Xian said. Dian stood up with difficulty and bowed to Xiao Xian. She said solemnly, "Thank you." Bian hurriedly supported Dian. At this time, Dian needed a lot of energy just to stand up. She had been lying in the stone vat all day long. Only her hand were slightly better. Xiao Xian looked at Dian, who was lying back down in the stone vat with difficulty. He asked, "Can I take a look at your totemic power?" As he spoke, Xiao Xian pointed at his head. He meant the totemic power in her mindscape. "No way," Bian quickly objected. It wasn't that there was a difference between a man and a woman. It was mainly because they belonged to different tribes, had different fire seeds, and had different totemic powers. Recklessly invading her mindscape would cause a strong rejection. Dian's body was already in a critical condition. If this happened, wouldn't she die? All right, Dian didn't reject him. From her point of view, Xiao Xian was willing to help and teach the D Mountain people how to merge their fire seed. This request was only for him to understand the situation. Perhaps he would give some important suggestions and opinions after seeing it. That way, it would be beneficial for the D Mountain people to merge their fire seed. As for herself, she didn't want to go back alive. She was already satisfied if she could contribute more to the tribe before she died. Bian was so excited that he wanted to speak to the D Mountain people again. However, he was stopped by Dian's words. He could only squat at the side with a bitter expression. He looked at Xiao Xian nervously. Xiao Xian walked over and asked, "Are you ready?" "I'm ready." Dian was very calm. Gue Zhe consciously took a few steps back and tried to distance himself from her. She had the aura of the Yin Jiao fire seed on her. If he got too close, it would affect her. When he saw Gue Zhe move, Bian thought that he had to do it. He also retreated to the door and stood guard. Gue Zhe wanted to tell Bian that Xiao Xian was a special case in Yin Jiao. He wouldn't be rejected by the fire seed. She had to stay away from him because of her fire seed. However, as a D Mountain person, he didn't have to stay so far away. However, when he saw how nervous Bian was, he didn't say anything. Bian leaned against the door and clenched his fists. He stared at the Yin Jiao elder without blinking. He saw the Yin Jiao elder raise a finger and place it between Dian's eyebrows. Dian was also paying attention to the situation in her mindscape. The D Mountain totem was the same as the second drawing she made. On the other side of the human face, there were some new things. However, the fish mouth hadn't formed yet. The fish mouth hadn't completely swallowed the human face yet. At first glance, the flames around the totem looked normal. They were all blue. However, only Dian knew that there were two different types of flames mixed together. Moreover, the D fish's flames were the majority. They were even surrounding her. Otherwise, her condition wouldn't be so serious. However, the D Mountain's flames were also fighting back. It was just that they were inside the flames, so it wasn't obvious. At this moment, a ball of white flames appeared in Dian's mindscape. When this ball of white flames appeared, the totem flames that were fighting fiercely suddenly calmed down. It was as if they were fighting and suddenly saw an outsider. They were so scared that they stopped fighting. Dian's condition worsened because the two types of flames in the totem flames were fighting. Therefore, when the battle stopped, Dian felt her body relax. The festering pain was still there, but it was much fainter. She didn't show any signs of pain. Bian's anxious heart finally relaxed a little. Xiao Xian saw the totem in Dian's mindscape. The D Mountain's totem flames were blue. They looked like seawater when they surged. The totem was very clear. He could see the fish mouth that hadn't formed yet. This meant that Dian wasn't exaggerating. The totem flames looked like they only had one color, but Xiao Xian could clearly tell the difference. He knew which flames belonged to the D fish and which belonged to the D tribesman. They were both blue, but in Xiao Xian's eyes, they were black and white. The situation wasn't good. The D fish's flames had already surrounded the D tribesman's flames. On the surface, only a small portion of the D tribesman's flames could be seen struggling. At this moment, Xiao Xian had a feeling that he could help. The ball of white flames flew towards the totem flames, but Dian Dian didn't feel any resistance. This surprised her. This was completely different from what the shaman had taught her. The ball of white flames approached the human-faced fish totem and entered the flames. It was like a bright sword that cut through the chaotic darkness. The D tribesman's totem flames that had been surrounded by the totem flames took this opportunity to rush out. Chapter 723. The D fish's flames, which were originally attacking Dian Dian's mindscape and trying to devour the totemic flames, started to crack wider and wider. The D tribe's totemic flames were like warriors who saw the light at the end of the tunnel. They tried their best to break free. The battle started again, and this time, it was even more intense than before. Dian Dian had just started to feel better when a sharp pain came from her festering wound. It spread throughout her body, but she clenched her teeth and didn't scream. Was it because of the fire seed's rejection? No, it wasn't because of the fire seed's rejection. That ball of flames wasn't the reason for all this. Her condition worsened because the two totemic powers in her body started to fight again. In the D tribe, the difference between those who were sick and those who weren't sick, no, those who were seriously ill and those who weren't, was that the two totemic powers in the former couldn't coexist and were fighting against each other like Dian Dian. The latter, on the other hand, were still in a stable condition like He Bian and the others. Right now, the two totemic powers were fighting against each other, causing her condition to worsen. However, they weren't pushing her towards death. Instead, they were fighting back. They were fighting to keep Dian Dian away from death. He Bian, who had been staring at Dian Dian nervously, wanted to go closer when he saw Dian Dian in pain. However, Gue Zhe stopped him. Don't panic. It's not a bad thing. He Bian couldn't feel it, but Gue Zhe, as a shaman, could clearly feel that the D tribe's totemic flames were growing stronger. It's not a bad thing, but Dian Dian doesn't look like she's fine. He Bian panicked. If it wasn't for the fact that they had to merge their fire seed, he would have probably rushed up and attacked Xiao Xian. Wait there, Dian Dian suddenly said. Her voice was suppressed, as if she was in extreme pain. However, she was determined and didn't allow He Bian to refute her. Hence, He Bian could only continue to stand there, anxious and uneasy. He kept staring at Dian Dian, afraid that something might happen. With Dian Dian's current condition, if she couldn't be treated, she would die in about 10 days. However, she still had 10 days. Every day counted. Could she not even last 10 days? However, no matter how anxious He Bian was, he couldn't go against Dian Dian's decision. After Dian Dian shouted, she didn't have time to pay attention to He Bian anymore. Right now, in Dian Dian's mindscape, the two totemic flames were fighting fiercely. What Dian Dian found strange was that the D tribe's totemic power in her body was much stronger than before. Other than when she first awakened, she had never felt such active totemic power. Ever since she had awakened, her totemic power had always been weak. She had been forced back by the D fish's totemic flames. But now, she was like a terminally ill person who had suddenly returned to her peak state. She was getting stronger and stronger as she fought. It was simply unbelievable. There was another thing that surprised Dian Dian, and that was the ball of white flames in her sea of consciousness. The ball of white flames was right beside her, but even though the D tribes and the D fish's flames were fighting fiercely, none of them attacked that ball of white flames. Logically speaking, if a power that didn't belong to her tribe entered her body, she would be strongly rejected. Just like the battle in her mindscape, that ball of white flames was also from another tribe, but it didn't reject her. On the contrary, Dian even felt that when this ball of white flames existed, the totemic flames in her mindscape became more active. However, she didn't have the energy to pay attention to that ball of white flames right now. She focused all her energy on fighting back. The D tribe's totemic flames in her mindscape were one with Dian. Dian's thoughts could also affect the totemic flames. Ever since her illness had acted up, every time Dian tried to use her totemic power, she would feel more and more pain. But this time, Dian didn't care anymore. If she didn't fight, she would die. She might as well fight. As her totemic power increased again, the totemic patterns under her festering skin were no longer obvious. They were even hard to notice because they were covered by her wounds. However, some brown blood started to seep out of her festering wounds. This kind of scene had happened before. Every time he had a serious illness, this kind of situation would occur. However, compared to the past, the bleeding rate now was much faster. In the stone vat, the clear water at the bottom of the vat started to turn murky. Not only was the color of the water changing, but there were also small pieces of flesh falling off the festering wounds in the water. The 3 piranhas in the stone vat started to jump around like headless flies the moment the blood started to seep out of the vat. They banged against the walls of the stone vat, making loud banging sounds. Soon, the banging sounds became softer and softer. The time between banging sounds also became longer and longer until there were no more banging sounds. He craned his neck and looked into the vat. All he saw were 3 fishes with their bellies turned up on the surface of the stone vat. Their blood-red eyes were wide open, and he could even see their fine teeth in their open mouths. Did they die just like that? Xiao Xian could feel the 2 powers in Dian's body fighting against each other. He wanted to retreat and leave the battlefield, but the moment he did so, the D tribe's totemic flame in Dian's mindscape became weak. When Xiao Xian brought the white flame closer, the D tribe's totemic flame became active again. After this happened twice, Xiao Xian knew that the white flame could make the totemic flame more active, and the totemic power would become stronger as well. The white flame came from another power in Xiao Xian's body. It was the light shield that enveloped the totemic flame. Its power was similar to the fire seed, but it was never rejected by another tribe's fire seed. This had happened in the drumming tribe, rain tribe, and other tribes before. Now, Dian's body was proof of this. The totemic power came from the fire seed. If the fire seed didn't reject this power, the totemic power wouldn't reject it either. On the contrary, every time this power was used, no matter if it was the Yinjiao's totemic flame or the totemic flame of another tribe, it would become more active. Xiao Xian had some guesses as to how the rain fell on the rain tribe back then. How did the drumming tribe's water moon stones turn into water moon stones in Xiao Xian's hands? How did the water sun stones turn into water sun stones? All these questions were related to that power, but Xiao Xian still didn't understand what it was. Xiao Xian controlled the white flame and moved it closer to the D Mountain tribe's totemic flame. With every inch it moved, the D Mountain tribe's totemic flame became stronger. On the other hand, the D Fish's totemic flame became weaker. Xiao Xian didn't dare to let the white flame rush into the totemic flame all at once. That might cause an uncontrollable situation. He could only test it out bit by bit. This white flame was like a giant hand pushing the tides of the battle. Under this push, the D Mountain tribe's totemic flame started to fight back. As Xiao Xian pushed the white flame forward, the D Mountain tribe's totemic flame also started to change. Retreat, Dian suddenly said. She didn't want Xiao Xian to immediately retract the white flame. Instead, she wanted Xiao Xian to move the white flame away from the D Mountain tribe's totemic flame. Now, the D Mountain tribe's totemic flame wanted to play a game of cat and mouse. No, it should be said that this was Dian's own plan. The D fish wanted to swallow her totemic flame, but now, with Xiao Xian's intervention, the situation had changed. Dian decided to use the same method on the D fish's totemic flame. Xiao Xian could even feel the D Mountain tribe's totemic flame in Dian's mindscape. It was filled with anger and killing intent. The D Mountain tribe's totemic flame wrapped around the D Fish's totemic flame. Swallow. The D Fish's totemic flame wanted to fight back, but the D Mountain tribe's totemic flame was too strong. It didn't give the D Fish any chance to escape. The D Fish's totemic flame was like a predator that swallowed its prey whole. Xiao Xian didn't leave immediately. Instead, he continued to wait at the side. He waited for the D Mountain tribe's totemic flame to strengthen until the situation was irreversible. At the same time, Xiao Xian realized that the totemic flame in Diandian's mindscape was changing. The D tribe and the D Fish shared the same totemic flame because of the conflict between their fire seeds. Whoever had the upper hand would have the totemic flame tilted towards them. At this moment, on the human face, the two simple lines that represented the eyes started to thicken in the middle. It was as if the closed eyes were opening. The human face started to grow bigger. The fins around the human face started to sway, and the fish tail started to sway as well. Amidst the flames, the totemic flame, which was originally a fish swallowing a human face, started to change back to its original form. The human face grew bigger, and the fins started to shrink. The fish mouth started to appear on the other side of the human face, and it slowly disappeared like a weathered stone. The process of swallowing might take a long time, but the totemic flame was changing at a speed visible to the naked eye. The swallowing process was accelerating. The D Fish's totemic flame was taking back the power it had stolen from the D tribe. Chapter 724. When the D tribe's totemic flames finished devouring the D Fish's totemic flames, Xiao Xian retracted the ball of white fire that had entered her mindscape. Xiao Xian retracted his finger and scanned his surroundings. The water moonstones in the room emitted a white glow. There was no light coming from the cracks of the windows. It's already nighttime. Xiao Xian was surprised. Yes, it's only been a while. Guizhe passed a small jade bottle containing pills to Xiao Xian. Although Guizhe didn't know what had happened and why it took half a day, it was undoubtedly exhausting. These pills were newly concocted after discussing with the Taiha tribe. They could quickly replenish totemic energy. It couldn't be compared to the fire crystals, but it was better than doing nothing. Grand Elder, how's Diandian now? Bian walked over quietly and asked Xiao Xian in a low voice. The person in the stone that had her eyes closed as if she was asleep. Only her breathing told Bian that she was still alive. He didn't dare to disturb Diandian, so he could only ask Xiao Xian. She's fine. Xiao Xian popped a pill into his mouth. Although he was only a bystander, maintaining that ball of fire had consumed a lot of energy. She's fine? What do you mean? Bian asked in a daze. If everything goes well, she should be able to recover for the time being. They didn't know what would happen to the D tribe and the D Fish's fire seed in the future, so they could only talk about the current situation. After all, Diandian was the only one who changed. Even if she could recover, if they lost the battle for the fire seed, she wouldn't have a good ending. Recover? Are you saying that Diandian won't die? Will she really recover? Bian couldn't control his voice, so he immediately lowered it and asked again, Really? Okay, pay attention to her tonight. You can give her some of the medicine that Guizhe gave you. Xiao Xian checked the situation in Diandian's sea of consciousness again. There were no changes, and it was still the same as before. After devouring, it still needed time to adapt and integrate. Just like a python that had swallowed its prey, it also needed time to digest its prey. Xiao Xian did not need to do anything, nor could he help. After leaving the settlement, Xiao Xian briefly explained Diandian's situation to Guizhe. While Guizhe was amazed at Xiao Xian's ability, which was different from other Yinjiao people, he thought, it seems that since the totem has changed, it should be fine. However, Diandian is the only one who changed. The rest of the D people are still the same. Will they continue merging their fire seeds? It should be. Otherwise, there's no way to solve it. On the other side, after Xiao Xian and Guizhe left, Bian found two people he trusted the most to take turns looking after the stone vat while the others stood guard outside. Inside the room, the light from the water moonstone allowed he began to see the situation in the stone vat clearly. Dian Diane's body was no longer bleeding. Most of her festering flesh had fallen off, and the water in the stone vat had changed color. It was also murky. The D people liked water, but they didn't like murky water. That was why he Bien carefully scooped the water out of the stone vat bit by bit. He also scooped out the 3 dead fish. Otherwise, they would rot and stink. Then he scooped in new water. He tried his best to be as gentle as possible and not make any noise. He was afraid that it would affect Dian Diane's recovery. After changing the water, he Bien and another warrior carried the dirty water out. When they were a distance away from the room, the warrior called Dulon asked he Bien worriedly, "Chief, can Dian Dian really recover?" "I don't know." That's what the Yin Jiao Grand Elder said. "Perhaps the solution that the shamanist mentioned really exists." "That's great. Our D Mountain tribe is saved." Looking at Du Lan's excited expression, he Bien had some things he wanted to say. However, he didn't dare to say anything. He had to wait for Dian Dian to wake up before making a decision. After all, the impact of what had happened was too great. Time passed by with he Bien's heavy heart. He Bien didn't sleep that night. The other D tribesmen didn't sleep either. They said that they would take turns to guard the place, but no one could fall asleep at a time like this. The 2 moons had disappeared, and the sun was starting to shine its light on the earth. He gently opened the window, and Yang Guang's light shone in. The water moonstone in the room was no longer needed. He Bien put away the water moonstone and looked at the stone vat. Most of Dian Diane's body was submerged in the water. Only the part above her nose was exposed. Her breathing wasn't heavy, but it was long and steady. She didn't look weak at all. Also, he Bien could feel that Dian Diane's life force had become stronger. It was much better than when they first arrived. He Bien didn't know if it was because of the sun shining on Yang Guang or because of what he discovered, but his gloomy mood suddenly brightened up a little. Although the water in the stone vat had been changed, it had become murky again after a night. Her festering skin kept peeling off. He Bien didn't know how Dian Dian was doing, but judging from the fact that half of her head was above the water, she should be much better. At least the festering on her face had lessened. Although he couldn't see her original appearance, he could tell that her condition was improving. He Bien elbowed Dulon and the others beside him and said softly, "Go get some water." The water in the stone vat needed to be changed again. The D tribesmen still loved cleanliness. It was just that the conditions on their way here didn't allow them to do so they looked like they were in a mess. However, they could tolerate it, but they couldn't bear to see Dian Dian suffer. She was the next shaman. The shaman was the core of the tribesmen. He Bien was about to get up and get some water when he heard the sound of water coming from the stone vat. He quickly looked over. Dian Dian, who had her eyes closed as if she was sleeping, finally opened her eyes. There was even a hint of surprise in her eyes. Dian Dian understood her own body's condition, so she could obviously feel that her pain had lessened greatly. Her body was much lighter now, and her weakened totemic power was much stronger after a night of fighting and devouring. After awakening, Dian Dian could feel the power of a totemic warrior once again. Of course, this was something to be happy about. However, Dian Dian soon noticed that something was wrong. He Bien and the others wanted to ask her something, but they saw the joy in Dian Diane's eyes turn into confusion and then into shock. A childish scream came from a room, followed by the sound of water splashing and panicking. He Bien rushed out his tent and ran to find Xiao Xian. He didn't know where Xiao Xian lived, so he could only ask the Yinjiao people around him. When he asked, his voice was trembling, and he even had an accent. The Yinjiao warriors listened a few times before they heard him say, "Great Elder." When Xiao Xian saw He Bien, he had just stepped out of the door when he heard someone calling him. He looked up and saw a figure running towards him like the wind. Then, with a plop, the figure knelt in front of him. "It's early in the morning. You don't have to be so formal," Xiao Xian said. No. He Bien's legs were weak. He was too frightened. When he ran over, he had already tripped twice. One of the times, he even rolled quite a distance. The Yinjiao people who saw this scene started to wonder if the D tribe had trouble walking. He Bien was shocked and anxious. He couldn't explain himself clearly. After he got up, he immediately dragged Xiao Xian towards the tent. When Xiao Xian saw He Bian like this, he knew that something must have happened to Dian Dian. He sent someone to inform Gui Zhe and Gigu. Then, he followed He Bian to the tent. He wouldn't understand if He Bian explained himself, so he had to go and see for himself. When they arrived at the tent, Xiao Xian saw more than 20 warriors waiting outside. Every one of them looked anxious. Some of them didn't know what to do, and some of them just stood there in a daze. It was as if they were too frightened. One of them wanted to drink water from the water tank outside to calm himself down. However, before he could bring the water to his mouth, he shook it off. The water in the ladle splashed out as his arm shook, but that tribesman didn't seem to notice it. He continued to bring the ladle to his mouth. As they walked into the tent and towards the stone tank, Xiao Xian saw more than 10 tribesmen standing there in a daze. He couldn't help but frown. What happened? Why were the tribesmen so frightened? Dian Dian's life definitely wasn't in danger. If that was the case, He Bian and the others wouldn't be like this. There was only shock in their eyes, not sadness. There was the sound of splashing water in the room. It was louder than the splashing sound he heard yesterday. It didn't sound like a child's hand. Also, there was no laughter today. The atmosphere was strange. The splashing sound stopped when they sensed Xiao Xian's arrival. When he finally arrived at the door, there were a few tribesmen standing by the door. They were drenched by the splashing water, but Xiao Xian didn't look at them. He quickly walked into the room and looked inside. What happened? Holy shit. Xiao Xian's footsteps stopped abruptly. His whole face seemed to be frozen, maintaining a look of shock. What? Ghost? Xiao Xian pointed at the stone tank. His mouth opened and closed a few times, but no words came out. Not long after Xiao Xian, Gigu, Gui Zhe, and the 2 retired shamans also rushed over. Gui Zhe wanted to see how Dian Dian's condition was after Xiao Xian's intervention yesterday. The other 3 were just curious. However, when the 4 of them arrived at the door and saw the situation inside, even the usually calm Gigu almost jumped up in shock. Dian Dian was lying in the stone tank. Her upper body was wearing the clothes made of fish skin she wore yesterday, but her lower body was a fishtail. Gigu really wanted to ask, "Are you a human or a beast?" However, he was too shocked and didn't know much about the situation, so he didn't say anything. Deep down, however, he was roaring. They thought that EC's half-beast human slave was already a novelty, but they didn't expect an even bigger surprise to be waiting for them here. Xiao Xian regained his senses. He took a deep breath and tried to calm down. Mermaid? Dian Dian could face death calmly in the stone tank, but now she was like a child. Her eyes were red, and she almost burst into tears. She had only swallowed a portion of the fish's energy. How'd she end up like this? You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.